Meeting of City Council to order for Monday, August 12th. Welcome. Our first order of business this morning is our delegations, and our first delegation this morning is Michelle Mobley is here this morning from Dawson Creek Literacy Now, and we have a proclamation on literacy for life. And so, good morning. Michelle, come up. It's good to have you here this morning. Welcome.
Nice to see you again.
Happy summer.
Thank you.
Now that we have sunshine and that yellow thing in the sky. Whereas literacy promotes opportunities for Canadians to increase their chances of success in today's complex world, as literacy is no longer simply reading and writing. And whereas engaging children and youth in literacy programming ensures the best possible environment in which they can become lifelong learners. And whereas strong literacy skills are vital to our country's economic and social development, and whereas literacy offers all Canadians an opportunity to make substantial contributions to the growth, prosperity, and well-being of our community, now therefore I do hereby proclaim the month of September 2019 as Literacy is Life Month in Dawson Creek. Thank you so much for coming in this morning and giving us the opportunity to do this proclamation. The work you guys have done, obviously, in bringing this important service and skill into our community for those residents is unbelievable, and we really appreciate it.
Well,
so,
thank you so much.
Floor is yours if you want to say a few words.
Just like mentioned, literacy is not just reading and writing. It's how we navigate our world in our day-to-day life. So everything from making a shopping list to going over your prescription medication with your doctor, and it's a big deal because about half of people in Canada can't calculate interest on something simple like a car loan. So it does affect everybody, and it does affect our everyday life. So just remember that. Thank
Michelle,
you so
thanks
much.
so much for coming in this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next delegation, we have Patsy Keane and Kathleen Connolly from the Executive Director of the Chamber of Commerce. Patsy is the owner of It's All About Health in offering the services that Patsy offers in our community. We had the opportunity to go and visit Patsy's clinic, and it's good to have you guys here this morning. Welcome.
Thanks.
The floor is yours.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I wanted to thank the City of Dawson Creek and, of course, Connie Patterson on a wonderfully successful Fall Fair and Exhibition this weekend. The sun came out, and it was such a great, our businesses just really were able to capitalize on that. So thank you for supporting that. Today, we are here as a chamber bringing one of our newest members to you to chat to you about some of the services that she offers that's sort of unique and special to Dawson Creek. So I wanted to introduce Patsy to you, and I'll let you.
Great. Tell your story.
Good morning.
Everybody. Thanks for having me here. And I just wanted to take this opportunity just to pass out. These are the services I provide. I'm kind of a homegrown, been here since 1962 kind of a person.
Thanks, Patsy.
I have worked in many venues in Dawson Creek and surrounding area. And anybody else who would like to? There's lots here. Yeah, I've lived here since 1962. My family has lived here. I feel bad with my back here. I've raised my family here. I've had many businesses. I've worked in the hospital since 1985, kind of dating myself, but I've worked on maternity, pediatrics, emerge, ICU. Now I kind of have a retirement gig in ambulatory care, which is really nice. I've worked with young adults, mentally and physically challenged young adults for community living. I still do travel nursing, which takes me to remote areas where there is no doctors, so I provide a service there in the Indigenous peoples. I have started a business about 4 years ago. I'm expanding my services. So I do wellness programs, which include immunization, blood pressure monitoring, pulmonary function, which is testing lung function pre and post Ventolin or prescribed bronchodilators for people who have worked in mining or mills for a long time. We can check them on a regular basis to see that their lung function is remaining constant. I do health liaison work for elderly in the community. Because I am a registered nurse, I can provide the service of going in, doing dressing changes, just checking their wellness. I do reminder checks for medications. I do return to work medicals for WorkSafe, and to make sure that everything is in place for them to recover and be prepared to go back to work. What else do? I do audio testing. I have a booth in my office, which is 2.5 blocks away. I've had that in place for about 3 years. I now have a mobile booth, which is, I travel to Chatwin, Fort St. John, and surrounding areas to do mobile audio testing. I have taken exclusive training in Vancouver to do custom molds for protection for swimming, snoring, you know, all of those really, and for protection of your ears in industry. And it takes about a 2-week turnaround. I can do the molds within 10 to 15 minutes. I send them away because there's nobody locally that provides that service to make the molds. What else do I do? Oh, I did go back to the spirometry. I went to California for a lengthy training to learn how to do the spirometry and to provide it on a safe.
So what's spirometry?
Spirometry is what we do to check lung function in the mines and the mills and such like that. So other things I do RN physicals for people who are trying to seek employment and have to show that they are fit for work. So I do that for eScreen and ECS. Many people in the industry send here. And because I am a nurse, I have 2 other nurses on staff and 2 other staff. So I employ 4 local people. And
so you have some interesting contracts here, right, or possibility for work through the city?
yes, so I'm looking to expand to work with this city, being a local company. I would love to do some work for you guys in the near future. I did just recently bid on the audio contract. What else can I say?
That's good.
And if there's any questions, I'm probably better answering than verbal.
Great job, thank you.
Yeah.
Questions for council? Anybody? Well, thank you so much for coming in this morning. Obviously, oh, Jeremy, go ahead.
No,
Or Shayla?
I actually don't have a question, Your Worship, but I would like to touch base with you afterwards, and I know we can connect through Kathleen, just with our South Peace Health Services Society. So there might be some information that we'll be able to share eventually through the Bill Trace House. So we'll make that connection through Kathleen. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Worship. So when I worked at the Encana Event Center for 5.5 years, every year we had to, because we're in a concert venue, we get our hearing tested. Having said that, I also worked as a landscaper in college. I worked some construction in a manufacturing plant, and not at any of those jobs did I ever have to have my hearing tested. How, as a preventative health measure, how underutilized would you say that is by industry and commercial services in general?
It's hugely underused. It's actually mandated by WorkSafe that all industry is tested yearly, which WorkSafe doesn't have a lot of representation for that. We have one lovely lady who covers kind of the whole province, and we are mandated to put in our entries for industry, but local businesses that are not in the industry, they actually utilize more than industry. I do have quite a few pipelines and mechanic shops and stuff I have reached out to them, and they're actually utilizing the custom molds a lot. Like, they would be my biggest industry right now. And then I forgot to mention, I also do screening for sleep apnea. So I go through the whole process of screening, setting up people on CPAP machines, and then continual testing for years after the company that I work for. And through that, I get a lot of private custom molds, like I said, for snoring, and because it's both people. Anyway, and swimmers. Quite a few swimmers have come to me from their use of the swimming pool, and children that have ear infections on an ongoing basis for swimming. That also.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. Obviously, health is such an important pillar for services in our community, and Patsy, we really appreciate that you've made this move into providing this really diverse bit of services in our city and region. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And I just, one more thing. It's not, I go from prevention to maintenance to, I do the whole scoop, and that's why I said it's all about health. It's from preventative is a great way to start, and that's the audio, spirometry, and all of that. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Dale, it was great.
Thank you. It's good to have you here.
Thanks.
Thank you. Kathleen, good to have you here.
Thanks.
Thank you. Our next delegation this morning, 2.3, we have James Lindsay from Wasco and James Gunn from Avia NG in attendance regarding a presentation to us on our Dawson Creek Airport. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Welcome. Good to have you here once again.
Yes, you too. Thank you. So you guys sit.
Duncan?
Yeah, so through your worship, maybe if I could just open up for these gentlemen today. So if council recalls, we had applied on a grant in January where we were doing some preliminary engineering on a runway extension. We withdrew from that grant as there were some gaps in costing, and there were some questions that council had. And I indicated when we were completed this engineering and we were completed this project, we would bring in James Gunn and have him present to council. So James is here today. He's first. We have him backwards on our agenda, so it's the second presentation if you're following along. And we have James Gunn here today to talk about the runway extension, all the bits and pieces that go along with that project. And then we have James Lindsay here with Wasco, our current airport operator manager, and he's here to fill in some of those gaps regarding runway extension, type of aircraft, maybe some gap in costs. And we're trying to answer all of those questions that council had here over the last 6 years or 6 months.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Duncan.
James.
Good morning.
So I'll
Welcome.
go ahead. Thank you, Duncan. So through your worship, just wanted to kind of set up the process for the discussion this morning. So as you know, we were recently retained to manage the airport. And so we don't have too much background on it. I've done my best to catch up as best as I can to get some background on the project. But James Gunn with Avia NG was the original consultant, so he's going to go through the technical elements of the runway extension presentation. And it's my understanding that the last time that this was presented to council, there was a few additional questions with regards to perhaps the technical elements or some of the other elements of the airport in general. And so my presentation afterwards is hopefully going to answer some of those questions. And then if there's any questions at the end, I'm going to politely ask that we hold the questions to the end, because if there's technical questions from James Gunn's presentation, hopefully they'll be answered during my presentation. And if not that, then I'd be happy to answer the questions at the end. And finally, there might be a little bit of overlap between our two presentations, but I'll do my best to keep mine kind of less technical, and James Gunn here is going to have the technical elements of the presentation.
Unfortunately, you got to sit through mine on a Monday morning, but I'll do my best to entertain you. So So James Gunn with Avia NG. Today I'm providing a briefing on some of the key elements of the design for the Dawson Creek Regional Airport runway extension project.
Let's go with that arrow.
So the project will extend the existing 5,000-foot runway 1,000 feet from the runway 24 end, which is the east end of the runway. This will include extending the pavement construction, various removals, including the runway 24 turning button, extending the storm drainage work, the sub-drainage system, and the electrical work. So our scope of work for this project is to design the extension to an issued for tender level and complete the public consultation process. So the public consultation was required as part of the project to notify the community as per the Canadian aviation regulations. As part of this, we prepared notice signage and installed it adjacent to the airport. We also sent out notification to key stakeholders. The consultation period was open for 45 days. We only received one comment from a landowner with an adjacent property. I'll touch a little bit more on this as we get into some of the other technical elements. So as part of this, we were also required to prepare a summary report. We have actually prepared this. We sent it on to the previous management, and once it's finalized, we'll send a finalized version into Transport Canada. So one of the questions, and I think one of the big questions for council is, what is the impact of the runway extension to some of the off-airport lands? So this is where we get a little technical, so try and bear with me here. So airport zoning regulation, or the AZRs, are sort of the key element when, to understand when looking at the impact of the runway extension off airport lands. The AZRs restrict the heights of buildings and structures and other things around the airport, including, trees. So the AZRs apply to off-airport lands. All the lands within the airport boundary are under the control of the airport operator, and they do not require AZRs. The AZRs ensure that the future development near the airport stays compatible with the safe operation of aircraft and of the aircraft, or the airport itself. So the map on this slide shows the current AZRs that are in place at the airport. So the airport had the AZRs put in place on November 23rd, 1984. So all the AZR information can be accessed online. However, one of the key pieces that we were missing, and I think previous to this discussion, we were missing the mapping to try and confirm exactly what was included for the runway. We did receive some additional mapping in March 2019 from the city, and this confirmed that the 1,000-foot runway extension was actually included in the AZR. We were missing that in February. So as a result, there is no need to amend any of the current AZRs with the proposed runway extension. Our project is staying within the boundaries of that AZR that was put in place in 1984. And just to note that, and you guys probably know this, amending the AZRs is very time consuming and can be quite costly as well. So this next slide just kind of gives you a bit of the map kind of gives you a bit of a visual of what we're dealing with here. So the gray dash line indicates the existing zoning surface, so that it almost shows up white here. The green line indicates the new operating surface with the proposed extension. So from a horizontal perspective, you can see that the zoning is quite a bit wider than the new surface will be. And again, on the vertical profile, you can see that the existing zoning is lower than the new proposed operating surface. So again, the existing zoning, which is already in place, is the most restrictive surface. So the conclusion we can draw from this, which is probably a big one for you guys, there will be no impact to any off-airport lands as a result of the runway extension. So the runway extension project is fully protected by the existing AZRs. So one of the comments from the public consultation was questions from an off-airport landowner asking how the extension would impact his land, and the response back as part of our summary report is there is no impact to the landowner. Another question that came up was what is the impact of the runway extension on the existing runway? And in this, we get a little technical again. During the initial design discussions, the direction was to design to an aircraft group number or an AGN of 4. This was based on ensuring the airport could accommodate the future use of a Q400, which is a pretty common regional carrier for Air Canada and WestJet. However, this would have a significant impact on the existing runway because right now it's only designed to an AGN 3A. So if you look at the chart on this slide, AGN 3A for the runway strip is 75. We'd have to increase that to 122. Similarly with the runway safety area, the existing is 40 and it would have to go 75. So this could, we'd have to move ditches, we'd have to increase graded areas, potentially move fences. So there are some costs associated with that. However, as we continued through the design in March and we further investigated the issue, we identified with Transport Canada that they'll accept the Q400 as an AGN 3A aircraft for the runway environment. This is based on the approach speed versus a large outer gear span. So the Q400 is kind of a bit of an interesting aircraft. It has the gear span out on the wings. So the gear span is AGN 4, but the approach speed is AGN 3A. So for the runway environment, the approach speed is more critical, and so Transport Canada will allow you to come down a code, which helps us out. So as a result, we modified the design in March to go to an AGN 3A instead of an AGN 4. So the conclusion of this, again, is good. There'll be minimal impact to the existing runway as a result of the runway extension. So if we can see on the chart here, we'll stay consistent with the runway extension, similar to the geometric design that we have for the existing runway. And then just a note here, just some of the preliminary project costing. This hasn't been updated since the spring. Right now we're forecasting $7.2 million for the construction cost, and as we work through the detailed design on this, that'll be further refined.
All right, thank you, James. Oops, wrong way. So just, looks like there's...
Tab will switch it over.
Okay.
Yep.
She's working behind the...
She's behind the screen.
Literally behind the scenes.
Literally behind the scenes.
So just a point of clarification on some of the technical elements here that I'm not too sure that I'll cover off in my presentation. So the airport zoning regulations are federally enacted regulations. And what they do is they provide easements onto properties that restrict the type and use and height of developments on the airport. So these are, again, federal regulations are available on the Department of Justice website. And the costs that James Gunn had alluded to is that when you amend the airport zoning regulations, you need to update the titles on all the affected landowners' properties, and so it's a very cumbersome process. Usually involves quite a few solicitors to manage that process, so it's very expensive and takes a long time. So the ability for us to, when Transport Canada implemented the airport zoning regulations back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they had done so under the premise that these airports would be expanded at some point in the future, and so they built a bit of a buffer in. So in some airports like Toronto Pearson International Airport, there's a whole other runway that is protected under the airport zoning regulations that doesn't currently exist. So there's a 7th or 6th runway there. And in the cases of smaller airports like Dawson Creek, a runway extension had already been proposed. So Transport Canada back in the 80s had assumed that there would be a runway extension at some point in the future and had protected for that. So all the landowner developments around the airport have those restrictions in place already. So it's not like we're changing anything. We're not changing the intended use. We're not changing the availability or the development potential for the airports as a function of the runway extension. That was already built into the zoning regulations when they were implemented in 1984. And then the other piece that I wanted to clarify that I'll talk to a little bit here is the AGN, so the aircraft group number. Transport Canada recently updated the way that they design and operate airports in terms of the regulatory document. It's called Transport Publication TP 312. aerodrome standards and recommended practices. And effectively what they did is they take all the aircraft that you could possibly have and group them into buckets. And so the different buckets have different protection requirements regarding how long the runway needs to be, how wide the runway needs to be, and the different protection areas around it. So the Q400, as James indicated, is kind of a unique aircraft in that the width between the main gear, so the main landing gear, is a little bit wider than it would be for a normal aircraft of its size. So what happens is that pushes it into a bigger aircraft category. Transport Canada recognizes that this is a bit of an anomaly, and so they're kind of in the process right now of updating that. So the challenge is the Q400 currently resides as an AGN-4, aircraft group number 4, and Transport Canada is looking to change that back to an AGN-3A. So but the other challenge that's in here is that the Boeing 737 is an AGN-3B. So they kind of split the AGN-3A and 3B, and that depends on, as James indicated, the approach speed of the aircraft. Being that the faster that an aircraft approaches, the more protection areas that's required. So as part of, prior to Wasco coming on board, there were some discussions and there's kind of some back and forth regarding, which aircraft group number is the best one to go with. And so what we're looking at when we come on board is not just the future or the current state, but also the future state in terms of how do we ensure that there's the long-term protection of the airport to make sure that the costs that we incur now to extend the runway, we don't have to change anything in the future, that we're in a position where we can set ourselves up for the next 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. And so that's some of the work that we're doing as part of this project, is to make sure that we can spend the right money now, if it's approved, so that we're protected for future aircraft operations. And why would we look at the 737? And I get into it in my slide. It's because this is the type of aircraft that's used for sun destination charters. And although we might not be looking at that now, it's certainly a potential for us to look at that in the future. And a lot of the sun destination charters like to add on destinations as kind of a trailing end. So they might, let's say, service Prince George first, and then the aircraft will continue on to Dawson Creek. So that's where there's some potential that we want to make sure that we future protect ourselves. So now I'm just going to kind of build on quite a few of the things that James Gunn had presented during his, and then there's also some other elements that Duncan wanted me to add as a function of the long-term vision of the airport in terms of I believe there's been some discussions in the past regarding whether the airport should remain certified, should we continue to go down this path, or should we not, and kind of the costs associated with that. So just a quick discussion. Last time I was here, it was a very quick presentation, so I wanted to kind of expand a little bit on who Wasco is. So Wasco Winnipeg Airport Services Corp. is a subsidiary of Winnipeg Airports Authority. Our vision, along with our parent company, Winnipeg Airports Authority, is to lead transportation innovation and growth. Our mission is, with our community, we provide excellent airport services, facilities in a fiscally prudent manner, and our values are respect, integrity, and service excellence. So this is kind of our operating structure. So Winnipeg Airports Authority resides at the top. They're the parent company, and they hold the ground lease with Transport Canada for the long-term operation of the Winnipeg James Armstrong Richardson International Airport. That one's a mouthful. So on the left, it's Winnipeg Richardson International Airport, and so what they do is they're a wholly owned subsidiary that's charged with operating the Winnipeg Airport. Airport City Winnipeg is our commercial development group, so they're responsible for air service development, marketing, communications, concessions. So they're the ones that bring revenue into the airport. And then finally there's Wasco, and what we do is we leverage the expertise of all the other groups, and we help support other airports such as the Dawson Creek Airport. And one of the things that I've tasked with one of our senior members of Airport City Winnipeg is to support the World Junior A championship, trying to attract some service into here during that period of time. So that's the kind of the bench strength that we're able to bring to some of these airports such as yourselves. So general discussion here. We want to talk about registered versus certified. It's best to get this conversation out of the way right away. Then we're going to talk a little bit about aircraft performance and why 6,000 feet, what's the value, what does it bring? Aeronautical zoning impacts, so I'm going to expand a little bit on that. Project delivery, and then finally financial summary. So registered versus certified. Transport Canada, again, likes to put things into buckets. It's a lot easier for them to manage the entire aviation industry when they can very quickly kind of categorize airports. So there's two main types of airports. There's certified airports, and those are the ones that are required to adhere to their standards. And then there's registered airports that are, Transport Canada recommends that they adhere to the standards, but it's not required. The Canadian Aviation Regulations, which is the guiding document for airports and aviation in Canada, recommends or requires rather that airports that are within a built-up area of a city or town, airports that have scheduled passenger service, or airports where it's in the interest of aviation safety, so where they meet those three criteria, they have to be certified. The last one is kind of like the minister deems, so that's basically if there's an airport site that is just grossly unsafe, then Transport Canada will come in and say, you either shut down or you clean yourself up. Most times that doesn't really qualify. It's really the first two, whether it's in a built-up area of city or town or scheduled passenger service. In the case of us, we are marginally within a built-up area of a city or town. So because of our flight path extend over the top of the airport and quite a few areas where there'd be lots of people, it's arguable that Transport Canada would deem us to be within the built-up area of a city or town, and then of course because of scheduled passenger service. So our current operating environment is we have scheduled passenger service with CMA, we have medevac, we have charter, and then we have itinerant and local aircraft, so aircraft just coming and going. So what I tried to do here was certified versus registered, and these are the different kind of requirements from a costing perspective, from an operating perspective. Checkmark being that we would required. If we we would have to be certified if we had a checkmark, and we would not require certification with an X. So certification, yes, we would need it for scheduled service. We would not need it for medical. We would not need it for charter. We would not need it for other. The regulatory program, so maintaining airport operations manual, wildlife management plan, emergency response plan, safety management systems, we would need all of those for scheduled, but we wouldn't need them for medevac, charter, or other. For an airport manager, absolutely, you would need an airport manager regardless of the type of operation you have here. We have enough medevac and charter that you would want someone wholly responsible for the safe operation of the airport, as well as management staff. From a winter maintenance perspective, and which is kind of the main thing, winter maintenance, emergency response, and wildlife management, those are the kind of key activities of the maintenance staff, and you would need those regardless. So a medevac flight has the same expectation for a maintained runway as a scheduled passenger flight. So if we want to keep medevac operations here, then we would have to maintain some staffing level on that. Security staff, those are specific to the scheduled passenger activities. So if we were to get rid of scheduled service, we could eliminate that position. Airport fueling, that's a source of revenue for us, so we would want to maintain that regardless, and there are a number of airports that are registered that have fueling. Maintained airfield, so that kind of supports the maintenance staff, so the snow clearing in the winter, the grass cutting in the summer, we would need to do that. Same thing with the winter maintenance. And then finally, the key one is ACAP availability, and we'll be talking a little bit about our ACAP project coming up here in a bit. But ACAP is the Airports Capital Assistance Program. This is a federal program managed by Transport Canada to provide funding for small regional airports that have scheduled passenger service. So if we do not have scheduled passenger service, we have no ACAP availability. So we talked about the airport staff, the airport manager, the medevac and charter, so they have the same expectations. So really so the airport staff, the manager and maintenance, that's required whether or not we're registered or certified. You could probably trim it down a little bit if you went down to a registered airport. Medevac and charter, again, same thing, you could maybe pare it back a little bit, but at the end of the day, you'd still need that activity at the airport. So really, in terms of what's the cost difference from going from a registered airport to a certified airport, the regulatory program is about $40,000 a year, and that's to do safety management systems, and then security is about $55,000 a year. So in terms of the cost differential between going between a certified airport and a registered airport, we're looking at probably $100,000 to $120,000 a year in terms of costs. So roughly 10% or so of the current funding gap. So here's the big one. The ACAP program is only available for airports with scheduled passenger service. So since the funding started in 1995, Dawson Creek Airport has received $6.87 million from ACAP. Because of the level of activity that we have here, that's 100% funded, so that means that we didn't have to kick in any money in order to get this money back from Transport Canada. So there's about 1.9 million for runway rehab, airfield electricals 2.1, airfield equipment 1.8 million, buildings 280,000, and fencing 665. And then already this year there's the airfield drainage project, so that is approved. So that's a $7 million project, which hopefully we'll get 3.5 million coming up here very shortly. And then the runway designation, due to the magnetic declination, we need to provide some new signs. So that's another $60,000. So decertifying the airport would make us not have access to this funding program, which I believe is essential to the long-term economic viability of this airport. So the cost to maintain the certification is minimal. In terms of the cost differential, presuming that we want to keep the airport operational. Without certification, there's no ACAP. That's a huge thing. So the management, our focus in terms of what we're here to do for the interim period is looking at opportunities to reduce the operating costs and increasing revenue and try and close in that funding gap at the airport. So that's the first piece. Moving on to the runway extension piece. Hopefully I answered some questions there. In terms of the aircraft performance, jumping back to the runway project, why are we looking at a runway extension? The longer the runway is, the more availability there is for an aircraft or bigger aircraft to operate. WestJet and Air Canada have kind of an unwritten rule that 6,000 feet is the new number. It used to be shorter, it used to be 5, which is why historically we've been able to operate the way we have. But now with different safety requirements for the large aircraft carriers, they're pushing that number to 6,000 feet. So the general information is the bigger the aircraft, the heavier it is, the heavier the aircraft, the longer the runway that's required. So how do we calculate the weight of an aircraft? So the takeoff weight, so it's the empty weight of the aircraft, what's the actual skin and bones of the airplane in terms of weight, plus the payload, that's the passengers, cargo, all that kind of stuff, plus fuel. So if you have an aircraft and you have a restricted weight because of the length of your runway, you can't change the empty weight of the aircraft, so you can do one of two things. You can reduce your payload or you can reduce your fuel. Reducing payload means that you can't carry as many people that are paying money to be on the aircraft, or you reduce your fuel, which reduces your range. So those are your two variables that you have to play with. So where restricted, there's a compromise in terms of payload, or there's a compromise in terms of fuel. So factors in impacting takeoff performance of an aircraft. So there's the aircraft weight, how much the takeoff weight of the aircraft, the configuration of the aircraft, the runway length, the altitude, the temperature, and then any contaminants on the runway. So contaminants on the runway would be snow, slush, rain. Most runway length calculations are calculated based on ISO, International Standard Atmospheric Conditions, which is plus 15 degrees. Zero runway slope, and zero runway contamination. So what I did here is put kind of charts together. So the DHC, that's the Dash 8-300. So what I'm doing here is I'm comparing old aircraft to new aircraft. I'm comparing the red, which is the 5,000 foot runway, versus the green, which is the 6,000 foot runway. So I'm trying to, why do we need a longer runway now versus why didn't we need a longer runway 10, 15, 20 years ago? And it's because aircraft are getting bigger, aircraft are getting heavier due to in-flight entertainment systems, longer range. Air carriers want to use their aircraft for more flexible needs. And also the way that the route structure works has changed. So for instance, I remember I did a master plan years ago for the Fort St. John Airport. And in the terminal building, there's a picture of 747 on the apron. And you could land a 747 on the apron in Fort St. John, but it was only going as far as Prince George because it had to be so light. So the route structure and how air carriers do their business has changed over the years. So the Dash 8-300 to the Dash 8-400, we can see that the Dash 8-300, there's no change there. The Dash 8-400, max passengers is 74 passengers. We can operate that off 6,000 feet, off 5,000 feet. We've got small restrictions, and those restrictions are going to be mostly when it's kind of hot and humid. If we look at the 737-300, so that would have been the old Canadian regional aircraft way back in the day, sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, mostly late 80s. They could operate off of a 5,000 foot runway with 106 passengers, which is an 80% load factor. So 80% of the payload could be on board the aircraft, which is pretty good, especially back in the 80s when average load factors were somewhere around 60%, whereas now load factors are around 90%. So 134 passengers is what you could get off that runway in 6,000 feet. So you could get even, you get the last 20% passengers. 737-800, so now this is a WestJet aircraft, a WestJet 737, a Sunwing 737, and so you could still get that 80% load factor, and you can get more passengers off because the engines are more powerful, the aircraft's more efficient, but the difference is how airlines are operating their aircraft, and an 80% load factor isn't enough anymore. They're aiming for 90, 95, 100% load factor, which is why you've likely experienced it, where you get bumped off your flight because they've oversold the flight. So with a 6,000 foot runway, it makes up that difference where you could take off with a loaded aircraft in terms of max passengers. So this is on a 500 nautical mile range. So this is the aircraft going from here, and it could pick up Vancouver or it could pick up Calgary. So this is a fairly short stage length. So hopefully that clarifies some of the aircraft performance issues. Airport zoning regulations, I won't dive into this too much because James Gunn did a fantastic job of explaining it. The operational classification of the existing runway is non-instrument at the runway 06 end and instrument non-precision at the 24 end. What this means is that, again, Transport Canada and their buckets. So a non-instrument runway, the aircraft can only approach to 500 feet above the ground without visually seeing the runway. After 500 feet, it has to be able to see the runway to continue. If it doesn't see the runway, it has to do a missed approach and try again or go elsewhere and divert. An instrument non-precision takes you down to 250 feet, and then an instrument precision takes you down to 200 feet. So runway 06 is non-instrument, runway 24 is instrument non-precision. So those are some considerations that we're looking at. Airport zoning regulations, again, there's on-site issues and there's off-site issues. So the current airport zoning regulations protect for 6,000 feet. The approach surfaces protect for instrument precision for runway 06, so that's right down to the 200 feet. And then runway 24, instrument non-precision. So there's a slight impact to due to the runway strip. So again, that change in regulations that I talked about earlier, the TP312, there's basically where these approach surfaces used to start at 60 meters from the threshold. Now they start at 61 meters from the threshold. So what does that mean? There's like a 2.5 centimeter impact in terms of height. But if you're building anything in aviation to a 2.5 centimeter tolerance, then you're doing things wrong because you should have more buffer than that. So it's really a low risk. And that goes back to the conversation about the AGN 3A, 3B versus 4. So all these things, as it moves towards, if approved, as it moves towards final design, will be some of the considerations that we look at to kind of clean up the design a little bit. So this is a drawing from the design brief, and that blue area where there's a low risk impact is really that 2.5 centimeter area. Everywhere else green means that the airport zoning regulations overprotect. So we've got overprotection there. And again, 2.5 centimeters is like that much impact. So we really shouldn't be building things to that level of tolerance. So the aeronautical zoning considerations for the runway extension, if we look at the taxiways and the aprons, no impact there. The terminal building, there's no impact on the terminal building. The other structures, there's no impact to the airport, to the other structures at the airport, like the city maintenance garage, and some of the other ancillary structures like the hangars and whatnot. The airport perimeter fencing is likely the only thing that we need to look at further, and there might be some impacts associated with that, in that the fencing is built a little bit too close to the runway, so we might have to push that back out a little bit. And speaking with James Gunn this morning, he has some data on that fence, so we could, as we move towards the design, we can figure out where those costs are. And so the green boxes, the taxiway apron and buildings, those are all good. The yellow fence at the top, so that's the fence that separates with the ponds to the north. That length of fence we need to look at. And then if you look there, there's kind of that approach road that comes in that services those ponds area. The fence kind of does a little jog there. It does a little kind of comes out. And so that area also needs to be looked at a little bit in terms of how that works. And really, the good thing is Transport Canada through ACAP paid for the fencing, so what we need to do now is just move it. So we don't need to purchase any more fencing, we just need to move the posts if there's an impact. The off-site considerations, so the industrial developments, there's no impact there. Briar Ridge, there's no impact there to the airport zoning regulations. Briar Ridge, there needs to be a review as part of the instrument approach procedures, the IAPs. And so there's basically a 0.16 nautical mile impact in terms of that's how much closer the runway threshold is to Briar Ridge, which is a fairly insignificant number from an instrument procedure standpoint because they deal with 2.5, 5 nautical mile increments, so 0.16 is a fairly small. And not only that, but as part of the project, we would have to redesign those instrument approach procedures anyways, because the instrument approach procedures are basically the GPS maps that the pilots use to fly into the runway, or to fly not into it, but to land at the runway. So
Good correction.
So by moving the threshold, we need to redesign those maps to make sure that the pilots are approaching to the new threshold. And then the water treatment building, I've done an assessment last time I was here. I took some shots and did some measurements, and it does appear to be good, but I'd want to kind of refine that in a little bit more detail to confirm that we're okay. And finally, just, picture's worth 1,000 words. So the final approach segment for an instrument approach procedure is 5 nautical miles. The approach surface, which is the protection areas that we're talking about, that's 5 kilometers long. So the runway threshold is at the leftmost. It's basically the start of the graph on the left. Briar Ridge is on the right, and then the end of the approach surface is where the green line is. So we can see that the approach surface is well clear of the ridge itself. Finally, project delivery in terms of next steps. So council discussion, council approval, then it moves into the funding stage. And then, so the stakeholder engagement piece that James Gunn was discussing earlier, that has a 5-year validity. So if we extend through that 5 years, then we need to do another consultation process, which, as James Gunn alluded to, was a fairly simple process. Moving into final design, there's the drainage ACAP project, which we'll discuss in a little bit. Ideally, it would be completed prior to, because there's subdrain work that's happening, and so we would want to make sure that those construction activities happen on or before. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't. It just means that there'd be a little bit of duplication of activities. And then finally, the runway construction extension. The construction duration, again, very preliminary at this point, so probably talking about a 4-month construction period. And then finally, pricing. So this is the table from James Gunn's presentation. There were 3 elements that The qualifications of the pricing was based on the existing scope of work. They were Class C cost estimates, so there was a 15% contingency in there, which was, I think, $912,000. And then the pricing was based on the 2019 pricing. And then finally, there were some exclusions, so obstacle management, so that's really the fencing. So really, we'd want to get into more detail on that. The original fencing project was $700,000 way back when. We have the fencing, so it's a matter of just moving the posts, so it's not as big of an issue. Updates to the airport zoning regulations, that's not required. And then finally, the cost to do the instrument approach procedure design, that's about a $60,000 estimate, so it's not significant when we look at the total project value. And that's it for technical. I thank you for holding your questions. You probably have a long list of them, so we're available here.
Thank you, gentlemen. Great job. Great job. Council. Councillor Lexstrom and Councillor Javecka.
Thanks, Your Worship, and thanks. That was a great presentation. Hey, a couple of quick questions. Presently, with our existing runway, medevac is always a question for people. You know, the odd time you'll hear they couldn't land here, they go to Fort St. John or whatever. As I understand it, every aircraft that they operate is eligible to land on the Dawson Creek runway. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, absolutely. So the reason they would land somewhere else is presumably because of the weather.
Weather. Okay,
Yeah.
that would be the only thing. Not a length of a runway is not an issue for our medevac here in BC.
Correct.
Okay. The other one that I was curious about, you made a comment that the airlines have pushed it out to the 6,000 foot requirement. So it seems interesting it's the airlines doing it and not the federal regulatory body that says here's the safety issues. Can you speak to that a bit? Has it been an ongoing push from the airlines themselves? Is it the pilots? It just seems strange that would come ahead of the federal regulatory side, safety, saying you need it or you don't.
Well, there's two sides of aviation regulations. So we're affected by the airport side of the house, in that we're looking at the airport regulations, and airport regulations state that if you have this type of aircraft that's operating at your airport, then this is kind of what you need. The runway length piece doesn't really affect into it. Transport Canada is moving their focus from if you have this long a runway, then this is the protection you need, and they're moving towards if you have this type of aircraft, then this is the protection you need, because this is how fast the aircraft is going. But runway length doesn't play into it. Runway length is driven by a function of the performance, because again, you could have a 747 operate off of a 5,000 foot runway, but it's coming in empty.
Yeah.
So what's really driving that now is the type of aircraft and how they're being built. So if we look at the takeoff weight of a 737-300 versus the takeoff weight of a 737-800, it's 50% more for the newer aircraft, and that's because they're fitting more aircraft in it, or fitting more passengers in it rather, and they are the weight's heavier because it's got in-flight entertainment, it's got this and that, it's got all these safety procedures or safety elements to it. And then finally, the last piece is Transport Canada. With every accident that happens, Transport Canada, or rather the Transport Safety Board, goes through an investigation process, and the Transport Safety Board is completely independent of Transport Canada. And so they'll have a recommendation that says that, okay, there was a crash that happened somewhere, and it might not even be in Canada, it might be in the United States or in Norway or in Europe, and it'll say that due to the runway contamination on the runway, we recommend that instead of a 15% margin, you use a 20% margin over the dry conditions. And so that's basically, if you're taking off with a little bit of slush, that there's a safety buffer. Everything in aviation has safety buffers. And so really what that is it's a change for the airlines, that they're saying, we used to be comfortable with a 5,000 foot runway. The manufacturer charts say that you're quite capable of operating off of a 5,000 foot runway, but we, the airline, want you to operate off of a 6,000 foot runway. And if you don't have a 6,000 foot runway, then we're not coming to your airport. We're going to go somewhere else.
And I would say 20 years ago, they would have been quite happy with 5. But as we move through life, the safety margins are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's really the issue.
So it's not a regulatory piece on our side, it's a regulatory and a safety piece on behalf of the air carriers. and at the end of the day, the air carriers have options in terms of where they want to fly to. And so if they can't fly here, that meets their kind of, inside their comfort box, then they're going to fly somewhere else.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Javetkov?
Just to clarify, we had an incident here where we have turboprop aircraft coming in for medevac, and we have jet aircraft coming in. We've had an incident a couple times where a jet aircraft is coming in, and I guess the technical term of runway contamination, they couldn't confirm that the traction was good. So they went to Fort St. John with 5,000-foot runway. Now, if that was extended to 6,000, is there a likelihood that they might have been able to land because of the extra distance? Or, is that an issue? I mean, obviously, if it was a 12,000-foot runway, they could probably land, even if there was a concern. I don't know for sure if they could actually, if there was a rating provided for traction or how it was determined, but it's obviously the pilot's decision. So going from 5,000 to 6,000, is there a chance that would make a difference?
So there's a couple factors going on there in terms of the operating conditions. So right now, the runway friction is measured using the Canadian Runway Friction Index, CRFI. And so basically what that is, it's a pickup truck with a calibrated sensor, and the pickup truck drives down the runway, slams on the brakes. It doesn't have ABS. It slams on the brakes, and it measures the friction in terms of how quickly it's decelerating. And it's calibrated to that specific vehicle. So there's different friction indexes, and typically what air carriers will do is they'll have a minimum friction index, and that minimum friction index is regardless of how long the runway is. So it could have been a 12,000-foot runway, but if the CRFI was, let's say, below a 0.2, 0.2 is typically the margin. A dry runway is around 0.5, 0.6, depending on the condition. 0.3 is typically like a little bit of snow cover. Below 0.2 is usually because of ice or compacted snow. So if it was below 0.2, regardless of the runway length, they would divert somewhere else. And so the question there is, was that the actual conditions of the airport at the time, or was that an old CRFI? Did it happen at night and they didn't request a call out, and instead of calling out the staff to come in and maintain the runway in the middle of the night, they decided that it was just easier for them to divert? So there's a number of factors going into that I don't know the specific circumstances. But one thing that I can say for certain is that there are airports like, let's say, the Grand Prairie Airport. They've got an 8,500-foot runway, and so they'll have a Q400. So a Q400 could land on an 8,500-foot runway and it not touch the brakes. It could land and it could use reverse thrust, and it could land in probably 4,000 or 5,000 feet without even touching the brakes, just friction and reverse thrust. And even still, if the CRFI doesn't meet their minimum standard, they'll not land. So it has to do more with the condition of the runway than it does the actual length of the runway. And that goes back to the discussion that I had earlier about being a certified airport versus a registered airport. If we still want to maintain medevacs, we still need staff on site to maintain the runway. That's not a function of it being certified or registered. That's a function of the type of operation that we want at the airport, mostly being the medevac. And in fact, Central Mountain Air probably would be like, psh, yeah, we're good to go, we'll land in that.
Yeah.
Whereas the medevac probably, their checky boxes are a little bit more stringent in terms of what they're looking for.
Okay. Another question, the difference between a AGN 3A and an AGN 3B, do you have a sort of a cost difference, or is there much difference?
The AGN 3B is very similar to an AGN 4. So the big difference is between the AGN 3A and the 3B and the 4. They're very similar. If we went back to one of the charts, yeah, you would see very similar parameters under 3B as you would for 4. So it's really trying to get either down to the 3A or bumping up to the next category.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of the cost differential, we haven't, I haven't yet gone into that to look at it, but really what we're looking at is, the main thing is our drainage ditches. There's what's called the runway safety area, which is basically off the edge of pavement. There needs to be another protection area if we're looking at kind of the cross section of the runway where the terrain is flat. On an AGN 3A, where a drainage ditch can be, is a little bit closer in, and then on a 3B and 4, it's further out. So we need to kind of look at the profile, the location and profile of the ditches to really understand what the cost differential would be between the two.
But it's really building those areas out, because right now the existing runway is a 3A, so all those ditches are about 75 meters offset from the center line on both sides. Same with the fences. So if you go to the 4 or the 3B, you're pushing all that infrastructure out. And the fences, we'd have to look at it. I think most of it's okay, but that was sort of, you know, we're in that sort of spot right now where we got to analyze both those things.
So the drainage, you mentioned that ACAP might start doing, providing money now. Is there a schedule for the drainage, or?
So there's a couple different drainage programs that we're talking about here, and when we talk about airport drainage, it can kind of be broad. So the drainage that we're talking about for the runway extension is the ditches. The drainage that we're talking about for the ACAP program was two different projects. We have sub-drains under the runway, or under the edge of, like just off the edge of pavement. And so that was an ACAP project tied into the culvert that goes across the runway approach. And so Transport Canada's come back and said, it was kind of an on and off situation, but last week they called us again and said, hey, we've looks like we've got some money available. So that is the culvert project, not the sub-drain project. They've separated those into two. So the culvert project is about $3.5 million of that $7 million estimate. So they've approved both of them, but how the ACAP program works is there's $38 million a year, and it's per fiscal year. And what happens is there's another project elsewhere in the country, and the one that happened a couple months ago, where I originally got the call. In fact, when I was here, I got the call from Transport Canada. There was a project in Quebec where they weren't able to completely finish the project due to timing and whatever. And so what ended up happening is they had money available, and they picked up the phone and called us and said, hey, we've got money available, can you spend it? And my initial response was, free money? Absolutely, we will find a way to spend free money. Much to Duncan's probably dismay of me getting a little bit ahead of myself, but free money is free money. And then they came back and said, well, it turns out that whichever project in Quebec, they weren't so good at math, and they had a budget issue. But then they came back, and I guess there's another project somewhere else. So Transport Canada wants to spend the $38 million, because if they don't spend the $38 million, it's gone. It comes from Treasury, it's allocated annually, so if you don't spend it, there's no ability to roll it over. It's either use it or lose it. And so a project like this is a fantastic project for ACAP to fill these budget holes, because it's a fairly simple project in that we're digging a ditch and putting a tube in it. There isn't a lot of electrical issues. Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than that. That's the engineer talking.
Engineer.
Okay, we totally got the dig a ditch
Guy
and
with
put
the
a
ring.
tube in it.
Yeah, the guy with the ring says it's a little bit more complicated, and not only that, but there's local contractors on, this is a project that can be completed locally rather than, a complex sub-drain project where we need to pull in contractors from elsewhere. So it's a great project for us to be able to do and spend the money right now. But there are, back to your questions, there's kind of a bunch of different drainage things going on, and the ACAP project is really what we're talking about right now, is this culvert.
So the 7.3 million estimate for the extension, does that include any of the drainage, or is that assuming
Separate.
ACAP will pay for it?
They're completely separate. So ACAP is going to pay for existing, and the runway extension project pays for just basically from the edge of the existing pavement, all the new infrastructure. ACAP doesn't pay for anything new. They only pay for existing.
And any of the ditching that would be required on the existing runway, that's not part of that 7.2 million number either.
So that has to be coordinated then?
So that's why we're looking at this AGN 4 versus AGN 3A, and that's one of the things we'll be sort of sifting through with James and his team to kind of get through the detailed design.
Councillor Parslow?
Yes, I'm looking at Table 8 in your presentation, the 7.2931. Is that entirely funded, the revenue to meet that cost from ACAP?
This funding for the runway extension is not ACAP at all. This is the BCAP program.
Yeah, that was considered in I think February, was BCAP. Because it's expansionary, ACAP will not fund this. ACAP will only fund rehabilitations. What else do they have on their list? This falls out of their funding envelope.
So where would the money come from for this?
So that money for this would be either other funding programs such as BCAP. There are federal funding programs available for projects such as this, but I think that we're kind of nearing the end, given that the election's coming up. I think that the federal government's doing a pretty good job of emptying their pockets right now.
Yeah, I would say that for this, the BCAP program is really the one you want to sort of start focusing towards. I don't know the exact details of that program, but this one falls within that, and that would be one that you would want to look at.
And is that 100% federally funded?
No, I believe it's 80%.
Yeah.
80.
How much? 80?
I believe it was 80 when we applied in January.
Okay. So, so I have a number of questions. So I found this presentation informative for sure. So I've learnt a number of things, which I won't list for you, but you throughout the presentation you've made reference to passenger planes that carry 70 to up to about 130 passengers. What's the adequacy of the terminal building for 130 passengers?
Not.
Completely not.
Yeah, which is why this is so, I wouldn't say completely not, I would say pretty shoehorned if we made some expansion, but pretty much not. But again, the purpose of this discussion is really looking at the runway extension project, and then where there's, you know, let's call it $7.5 million invested in the airport. Why are we looking at these different aircraft types? Because we don't want to spend $7.5 million at the airport and look for the next 5 years. We don't want to look at the aircraft that exists today. We want to look at the potential and what could happen in the future. And in the future, is it reasonable to assume that a 737 could operate here? Absolutely. Depending on the type of activity. Again, where we have a sun destination charter, it's not likely that that sun destination charter is going to be solely servicing this airport. It's going to service another airport. It'll be part of a string. And in fact, at Winnipeg, there was a flight where Sunwing wanted to start a new destination out of Thunder Bay, but they didn't have the passenger volumes. They weren't sure if that aircraft could be completely sold out. So what do? They start in Winnipeg, they pick up the rest of the passengers in Thunder Bay and then continue on. So it's quite likely that there'd be something like that, whether it be through Grand Prairie, Prince George, Fort St. John. So it's likely that aircraft would be picking up passengers somewhere else. So we don't need 130 passengers, 170 passengers through Dawson Creek, but 50 passengers, which we could fit within the existing terminal building. So it's kind of it's a longer question than that, but really what it is, or longer answer than that, sorry. But really what we're looking at here is if we're going to invest this money, then we want to invest this money in a way that allows us to grow into it, rather than spend the money and restrict ourselves based on the existing aircraft types that we have today.
The reason for asking the question is, of course, you know, if you have the capacity, but you don't have the facilities to manage the passengers, so it happens all the time with municipal government. I'm finding out, you know, one thing leads to another, and it's ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. And
absolutely,
you know, scope and sequence is obvious, but not really taking heed of small passenger planes. I had that as a question. You made a reference to it. What's the future of smaller passenger planes? I mean, we have trouble filling a 20-passenger plane right now, okay? So we were told that those planes were no longer being made, and that the only planes that we could see in the future would be about the 70-passenger. I'd like a comment on that. What's the facts there as it relates to the future of smaller passenger planes?
So there's truth that those aircraft are not being manufactured anymore, with an asterisk. So there's a new plane that's being manufactured right now. I think it's in the testing phase. It's built by Cessna. And it's a twin-engine aircraft that's mainly driven, like FedEx is the prime purchaser of this aircraft. So they're the ones that are purchasing it, and they're using it to fly into small airports in the United States for cargo purposes. It does fit passengers. I think it fits 19 passengers on board. So there is that aircraft in the future potential, but in reality, yeah, it's the 70-passenger. The Q400 is really the aircraft of the future. The Dash 8 100s and 300s, the 100s are going by way of the Dodo Bird. They're being timed out in terms of an aircraft can only have so many cycles, so many takeoff and landings before it has to do a major overhaul. For like a DC-3, it makes sense for them to do those major overhauls because it's a bit of a workhorse. But the reason why you only see a few DC-3s is because of the cost of doing that. It doesn't make sense to do that on the Dash 8 100. The aircraft is not worth it. So the Dash 8 300s are the next aircraft that are going to go out. They're still manufacturing the Dash 8 400s, the Q400s. So that aircraft is the logical progression of that market. So absolutely smaller aircraft are going out, larger aircraft are in. And what does that mean for our airport here? It means that there will always be the Central Mountain Airs of the industry of the small regional aircraft that can serve small airports such as Dawson Creek. And the reason why we're having a hard time filling those seats is because of where Central Mountain Air flies to. They're servicing the market to get to Prince George, and the challenge is that there isn't really a lot of demand for us to fly to Prince George because we could probably just drive there. We really want to get to Calgary, we want to get to Edmonton, we want to get beyond those places. So the challenge is working with our air carrier partners that fly here to get those destinations that are really going to drive that demand. It's really getting into Calgary, getting into Vancouver so that we can make those connections and go to Saskatoon, or we can go to Toronto, we can go to Montreal, go to Halifax. That's what we need to do from an air service development standpoint.
Yeah, and I would add that you know, we're in a growth industry. You know, people are traveling a ton. That's going to continue. So, you know, you really want to gear yourself towards that. You know, getting to Edmonton, getting to Calgary, getting to Vancouver. So.
It's a challenge because aviation is not a build it and they will come. It's a build it and then you need to sell it and then maybe they'll come.
Yeah, especially in Canada.
But the opportunity here is that it's not being driven just by, the runway extension is not being driven just by the new destinations. It's also being driven by kind of what the airlines will accept. And if we want to be in the game, then a 6,000-foot runway is almost what we need. Can we make do with a 5,000-foot runway? Absolutely, we can make do with a 5,000-foot runway. But what that means is that in the future, we will be limited to the small regional carriers like Central Mountain Air indefinitely. And then we need to kind of accept the fact that that is the type of operation that will be here. We're going to be a medevac airport, and we'll be a small itinerant, like the local guys that are coming through from a tourism standpoint or that kind of thing, or transitioning through. But if we really want to provide scheduled passenger service, then this is the direction that we need to go. And with exception to the capital cost of it, even if we wanted to go down to a registered airport, the cost differential is minimal. So really, like in terms of the annual operating costs, it's really focusing on how is an airport financially sustainable? It's through scheduled passenger service.
Thank you. Councillor Earl, one more, and then we've unfortunately got to move.
Thank you, Rich. I'll be quick. So just following up on your point you made with respect to the cost differential between a certified and registered airport. So that's $120,000 kind of max, as you stated, but that's just the expenditure. It doesn't include the potential loss in revenue from fuel sales and other revenue foregone because we no longer have the scheduled flights, correct?
That's correct, yeah. So I'm
Okay,
looking
so
at the expenditure side, not the revenue
only-
side. So it could be, you're absolutely correct. It could
So
be
it
more.
could either offset that or unintentionally increase the public subsidy required, and not only that, but we wouldn't be eligible for ACAP funding for any of our capital projects.
Yeah, that's correct.
So other than that, just, thank you for the presentation. I know when we pushed the decision for a year, it was because we were, there were some unknown costs in there potentially, and we were worried about opening up a Pandora's box. And I think with respect to costs around the existing runway and the impacts on off-airport lands, you've answered those in the best way we could have hoped, so thanks for that.
Thank you. Duncan?
Yeah, so through your worship, something that James didn't get into is an opportunity that's been presented, and I'm not sure where we can speak about that, if now is the appropriate time, or if there's somewhere else in the agenda you want to talk about that, but a Transport Canada proposal or opportunity to fund an ACAP program that we submitted, I don't know how many years ago? 5 or 6 years ago. They've come forward with an opportunity as a result of a project in Quebec or somewhere else falling through. I'm not sure where you want to speak about that.
Well, so let's do it now, and then I'll bring it back under Mayor's business.
Okay, so maybe James, you can speak about that project then.
Absolutely. So the project involves so I alluded to it earlier. So there's the sub-drains beside the runway. This is all existing, this is not new. So the existing runway, there are sub-drains that extend along the entire perimeter of the airport, or the runway rather, to facilitate drainage. Those have failed. Where you dig up the sub-drains, you also have to dig up the electrical, so there's some electrical works that are associated with that. So that's part of the project. We'll call it A part, and then the B part is there's a culvert, a large culvert that extends towards the west end of the threshold, or sorry, the runway. And there are 2 smaller culverts, and one of those culverts have failed. And what's happening now is that during storm surges, there's a significant amount of erosion that's happening, and then it's eating into the runway environment. So those are both drainage projects, but at the same time, they're not, they don't affect each other. They can be completed independently. So Transport Canada has approached us and said, we have some funding available. We would like, what is your availability to complete this project under short notice? And my response initially was absolute free money. We will find a way to spend it. And then the conversation with Duncan after the fact, there's a few I's that need to be dotted and T's crossed, mostly speaking with the Mayor and Council. The reason why this project is a short notice project is because, quite frankly, it's not a sexy project. Transport Canada likes to announce fantastic projects where they're providing new equipment, or they're doing this, or they're doing that, or they're rehabilitating runways. They like big fancy projects. I'm not entirely sure that the Minister of Transport wants to get up and say that they're purchasing a culvert. But at the end of the day, this is really important for the drainage at the airport, because this is a main culvert that facilitates drainage basically from the whole south side and west side of the municipality, and funnels it through the airport property. And where this culvert has failed, we're going to continue to get erosion and erosion and erosion. So will Transport Canada fund this project in the future? Potentially, they may. But it won't be next year, and it won't be the year after. And if we ever get funding for this project, it'll probably be under similar circumstances to now, where Transport Canada has money available, and it's kind of a side project that they're like, hurry up and get it done. So the ACAP has challenges, and we can only demonstrate those challenges where we spend all of the money. And this project, having worked with the city Dawson Creek for a few months now, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that replacing a drainage culvert at the airport, where there's the potential that it could get funded by the federal government, doesn't sit high on the city's list in terms of priorities. But at the same time, it is an important project from a drainage standpoint, not just at the airport, because it does impact the airport environment, but also from a municipal standpoint as well. There's other factors that are at play here. So where there's money available, where Transport Canada is coming to the table and saying, we want to give you $3.5 million to complete this project, that's where the optimist in me says, we'll find a way to spend your money.
I like the way you think.
Duncan?
Yeah, through your worship, the other piece that I would add, essentially, is this is a culvert at the west end of the runway, along, just behind the water treatment plant, I think, or,
It drains towards water treatment.
yeah, it drains towards. And as far as the catchment area for that culvert, Kevin, I think we were chatting, and it's essentially from Bear Mountain east all the way to the airport. Everything on that hill flows through town, past Walmart, all through those drainage ditches. All of that drains through this ditch. Is that correct, Kev? Yeah.
100% funded, we pay for it and then they reimburse us?
30 days after completion of the project, I believe, is their timeline.
Yeah, typically they're pretty good at paying their bills.
Awesome. Councillor Lexton?
Just a quick question on that. So up to 3.5 million, if we do it for 2 million, can we use the other 1.5 for the side ditches, just the one?
Yeah, and again, that's where this money comes from, is that other projects, their contingencies or whatever have resulted in money not being spent. So that's where, you know, the contribution agreement is fairly defined. And what we have added, which is something that was in the budget this year, for the city to pay out of their pocket, was for the new signage for the runway designation change. There was about $60,000. So that's ACAP eligible as well. And so one of the first things I did when I got here was say, why are we paying for this when Transport Canada will pay for it? So we're looping that into it as well. So there's a bit of a savings there in terms of us being able to not spend our own money on a project that Transport Canada should be funding. So we're kind of looping those two projects together, but unfortunately, if it does, for whatever reason, through favorable pricing, we get some surplus money available, it's not like we can use it somewhere else. It's pretty structured. You can try.
Then through your worship, just I'll ask James also, usually these contribution agreements, he triggered me, have some kind of operational requirement, remain certified or remain registered.
That's correct, yes. There is, I'm still waiting to get a copy of the latest draft of the contribution agreement, but the previous one that I did for the other airport that I'm responsible for, the PA airport, it was a 10-year, 10% a year type payback. So if you lose your scheduled passenger service within 1 year, you need to pay back 90%. Within 9 years, you pay back 10%.
If we lose it at the call of the scheduled carrier or our call?
No, if we decertify as a function, yeah.
So if we went from a certified to a registered,
That's
we
correct.
lose our passenger service, then we would be required to reimburse it.
If we made
Only
the
at our
decision
call.
to decertify, that's correct.
If we lose our passenger service capacity, right?
No, if we make the decision to not certify as a certified airport, then they couldn't fly in here?
That's correct.
Yeah.
If we decertify.
If the CMA decides not to function, we don't have any passenger service.
That doesn't impact it then. It's only our decision to move from a certified airport to a registered airport that we would then be required to reimburse Transport Canada for that funding grants that we've received,
That's correct.
based on the number of years that we've been in operation. Go ahead.
And I'm not sure, your worship, where we'll have this discussion, the 3.5, we'll just say it's 3.5 total, we have to fund that. I guess my question through to yourself, Duncan, or Flavia, do we have the ability to float that and fund that prior to being reimbursed? If I look at the budget, I think we do.
So we can so we'll bring it back under Mayor's business.
Sure, we'll have
and
that
then
answer.
We'll allow them to.
You bet.
Yeah, we'll have that. I just wanted to, if we get council to have the information, we'll bring it back under Mayor's business and administration can give us that. You guys, look, thanks so much for being here today, and obviously really great information, really important information. I think council over the last number of years have been dealing with the airport and the runway extension, and it's been really unknown with lots of this stuff. You've answered a bunch of really important questions, I think, for all of council today, and sincerely appreciate you coming today and giving us this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
So we'll take a 5-minute break and recess, and then we'll be back at 10:30. 6 minutes. Great presentation. End of our delegations, and now we move into new councillor business. Councillor Wilbur.
Thank you. First off, I just want to reiterate what Kathleen did from the Chamber. Congratulations to Dawson Creek Exhibition Association. Even with some bad weather, they forged forward, and I think it's been a great show. So congratulations to them. I did place some information at each of your stations. So we're talking about Bull Trace Community House and the Southeast Health Services Society. So first off, Your Worship, thank you to you and the mayors of the South Peace and the area directors for recognizing the need and forming the society that we now have been well underway for going into our 3rd year. And thank you to all the volunteers who are on that board, because without them, we wouldn't be to where we're at today. So, but thank you for the foresight and trusting us and believing in us that we could do this, and hopefully we're fulfilling that. So what you do have in front of you is a little package that we are sending out to all possible donors, and if there's a rock to be turned, we're turning it. So that's kind of the little package, and what you'll see in there is just a letter from myself kind of introducing the society and our project, a donor pledge form, so if you know someone that you think potentially could be a donor, please pass on your package, as well as a site plan. And really what that lays out is the existing residence, which was Dr. Boltre's office, and we have purchased that in December of 2018, and they were very kind to us, and I will tell you the purchase price was less than what Dr. Boltre's put in for renovations, so we're getting kindness in all forms. What you will see, and I'm not good with northwest and south, but at the top of the page is an accessibility addition, and this will be 2 fully accessible bedrooms and a shared washroom and a fully accessible hallway. So whether you just have mobility issues or perhaps you're even a quadriplegic, you would be able to stay in this house and have accommodations and be able to receive medical service, or perhaps you're just visiting with family, we can accommodate you as well. Currently there's a carport that faces 13th Street. That would be removed, and what we're adding on there is intake registration office as well as another family room. And then the carriage house, which would have 2 bedrooms, shared living space. Potentially that is for visiting locums or maybe nurses or specialists that's in town. And we could utilize that space for them. And the reason for the separation is that we're all human, and if we're not feeling well and we know that there's a nurse or a doctor in the house, we're probably going to go bang on their door. So we want to try and accommodate everybody, but at least create that separation. Ashley Arve has done all the work for us right from the very beginning, and she's donated all of her time, and we can't thank her enough for that, because we're constantly phoning her and asking her for slight changes or modifications, and she's accommodated us. You will see on the front page kind of a conceptual outlook of what we expect to look like when we're finished, and I think it's going to be very welcoming in the neighborhood, and we're excited. Can you hear the excitement in my voice? I'm really excited. So we've come a long ways from December of 2018 to last week on Wednesday. We brought together all of our foundational funders, so PRRD, Lakeview Credit Union, and sent out invitations to our other neighbors to come and just celebrate with us our partnership and contract agreement we've come into with Celtic Construction on this project. And so the board is mandated that we shop local, we hire local, and we be as local as we can, and Celtic has followed that to a T and just been a really great group of people to work with. And we're all excited, but I'm going to say Eugene from Celtic Homes is more excited than anybody I know, and he's kept our construction committee busy with thoughts, plans, and ideas. So we're very, very excited to be working with them. As well, you've been provided with our operational plan for the facility. Now, this is a plan. We're new. It may change as we move along and we're operating the facility, but we're very proud to say that we have come up with a plan to keep it affordable, and it's very affordable. It's $20 a night or $600 a month. If you have a caretaker staying with you, which could be a relative, your spouse, we're accommodating that within our rooms. We'll add an extra $10 on for the stay for that extra person. So we've had great excitement and input from those that are our partners now financially in this project, that we've managed to accommodate that affordability. So we're excited about that. We will be hiring 5 people. We'll hire 2 full-time. We will have a facility manager or administrator, and also we will have a full-time cultural relations person. So we recognized not just our First Nation neighbors, but also the different cultures within the communities. And something that came up in discussions with different groups was that unsettled feeling of being away from home. And so we want everyone to feel welcome, and we want them to feel at home when they stay at the Bull Trace Community House. So we felt that was important. And then we will have 3 part-time staff. The house will be open 24/7. We're not closing at Christmas. We're not closing on holidays. It will remain open every day of the year. And we think that's vital because services and emergencies happen at any time. And so we want to make sure our doors are open. I will tell you, I think we're going to be at full capacity from day one. And so we're already looking at futuristic plans of how to make those accommodations. We have partnered with local hoteliers and landlords in the community for overflow, and they will be providing rooms at the same rate that we're charging at the Bull Trace House, with the difference being a contribution to the society. So we already have that in place. We actually have a young mother coming from Fort Nelson in September who's having twins, and we have been able to find her accommodations at the same rate that we would charge for the Bull Trace House. And I do believe we have a meeting coming up in October with Aboriginal Health at 101, and they also have some clients that will be coming down prior to us being opening, and we will make accommodations for them with that through partnerships that we have. The plan, Celtic has a very strict timeline, and we've already got in place our permits and stuff. We're going through the process at the city right now, and they plan to hand us over the facility at the end of December so that we can furnish it and get it ready, and we plan on being open for February. So in a short year, we have purchased property and we're underway to being open, and I think that's the most exciting part. And I do want to say thank you to Pat Sutherland, Helen Ezard, Kay Moody, and Jeanette LeQueer, who were our operational planning committee, and they worked with Dougal Smith on putting this together, and that was a lot of work for them, and they did it, and we made them go back several times and fix it up, but they did it, they stayed steady, and here we are today, because we couldn't apply for any funding without it. Further, we have applied for capital gaming grants for part of the project as well, and I know you'll see a letter from myself later, which I will step out on, that we are applying for rural dividend funding. We can apply for $500,000. Since starting the process, we've had some funders come on board for specific things within the facility and the construction, so we'll only be applying for $250,000, which is basically right now matched 50-50 on what money we have available towards this project. So we're have more than covered our 40% that we would need to provide. As well, we are looking at some NDIT grants that we qualify for, as well as the BC Regional Gaming Funds. So we're very fortunate to have 2 board members that actually work, and one is the manager from Chances Casino. So anytime there's money that's coming available, they've let us know. And as well, if anyone's inclined, every Saturday for the next 3 weeks, you can go from 1:30 to 3:30 down to Chances. You don't have to play bingo, but you can buy a hot dog and a pop, and all of that proceed goes to the Bull Trace House, which also puts us in a competition for another $5,000. So I will take any questions. If anyone has any questions, kind of a little snippet of where we're at. We are going to be in Tumbler Ridge this evening, updating them. We'll be in Chetwynd in September, and we're right now scheduling meetings with all of our First Nation neighbors to update them. And again, thank them, Doig River and Soto, for their contribution to the project.
Thank you, Councillor Wilbur. Great job.
Thank you.
Great job. Councillor Parslow?
A couple of questions. In the budget document, you show the initial loss of about $250,000. How's that being covered?
So the grants that we are applying for, which are regional, are for operations, and so it would offset that. We do understand, given the rates that we're going to be charging, fundraising will be continuous for us, but we do have opportunities within different levels of government that we are reaching out to cover that operational difference. Reality is, right now, without the partnerships we've made, or if you were just to come here for medical service, you're paying on average $1,500 a month for accommodations, plus groceries, plus travel to get around and all of that kind of stuff, and still maintaining your home from wherever you're at. So we're constantly going to be in a state of fundraising, Councillor Parslow, and we recognize with our plan exactly what that means. So we will have annual events, but we are sourcing out all opportunities available to us for operational funding.
Thank you. Councillor Lexter?
Thank you, and certainly thank you for the work you put into this, Councillor. It's amazing to have this opportunity. Now, maybe having just received this, I haven't gone through it page by page, but the challenge I see that it's good, I guess good in one way, the amount of usage of this facility I think will be phenomenal. How do you pick who goes in, who doesn't? Is it just first call gets the open bed, or is it evaluation based on need? I'm not sure how that would work.
It is going to be on a first come, first served basis at the beginning, and as we move forward, can recognize where the needs are. So because we have 2 fully accessible rooms, if they're not booked, it doesn't mean a regular patient, and I say regular in the sense you don't have mobility issues, couldn't utilize those rooms. We do have one ensuite bedroom upstairs that has the ensuite with it, and that will be prioritized for those expectant mothers coming from Fort Nelson. So they're there for longer term. Within the house, other bedrooms will be sharing washroom facilities, and that's just reality of the facility. So we have done some prioritization, but it will be on first come, first served basis. But we also have checks and balances in place, so you can't just phone up the Bull Trace house and say, I need a room. We will have to verify that, yes, there's a doctor's appointment or there's surgery at the hospital. So we have some checks and balances that are in place through registration to make sure that the room's actually needed by someone who's receiving services. And it's not just limited to hospital service or medical service. It could be dental surgery. It could be, so we have people coming into our community for a variety of things. But we do have and will utilize those checks and balances at registration.
All right, thank you.
Great job. Any further questions of Councillor Wilbur? So just background, this is a society built on the partnership of all of our South Peace neighbors and the rural areas. Yep. And representation across the region. Core funding's coming through that regional district partnership with all of us. And honestly, when we started this, couldn't be more pleased to see how we now have a home, a place for people to come and stay when they're seeking medical services like maternity or oncology or general surgery, orthopedic surgery from long distances, and that stress of healthcare coupled with the stress of financial costs of staying in a hotel and restaurants and all of that. This is just an amazing partnership for all of us, and really the society of grassroots people across our region are going to make this and are making this what we had hoped it would be. So great job, Shaylee. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we look forward to the next 3 or 4 homes that you purchase.
Well, we're looking at it, and I just want to. We are looking at it. I just want to add though too that we couldn't have purchased that home without forming a partnership with the Lakeview Credit Union. So you know, when you talk about local, there's local banking too, and we couldn't have done it without them. And they've been very kind and generous in their support. So just a shout out to them as well.
Thank you. Anything further? No. No, you're good.
I'm good.
Councillor business, other councillors? Councillor Lexington?
Just a quick maybe clarification. Over the last little while, I've heard some, with the summer ice and the no summer ice in Dawson Creek, there's some people out there that were thinking, oh, there's no summer ice because money was moved somewhere else in the budget, and it was, the reality is there just is no money. The summer ice is one that we asked, that we're happy to put it in, but you have to recover by full cost. There was a couple of comments out there that the money had been relocated to different avenues or venues in the city. I just want to make it very clear that's not the case. We are happy to provide summer ice, but I think financially you have to be realistic that it has to be at a cost recovery throughout the year for our youth, and that we run at a 50%, where there's, call it a subsidy, but is it 75? Am I off on that? I thought it's 50 points.
Through your worship, it's non-prime is $100 and actual is 376, so it's...
Okay, so even greater than 50, I apologize. So I just wanted that for clarification, because when I heard it, I was a little surprised. I wasn't sure where that was coming from, but there's always information, and people feel free to contact any counselor, City Hall, if you have questions. It's far better to get the factual information out there than it is to guess at what's going on. So that would be it.
Good, thank you. Any other councillor business? Council? Thank you. We'll move to minutes. The minutes of our regular meeting of council of July 22nd for adoption. Move Councillor Wilbur, second Councillor Kemp. Any errors or omissions? Councillor Lexer? Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. And business arising. Councillor Lexer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick one on 751, where there was a motion moved to invite the regional manager of CN. I'm not sure the regional manager has to come present at a council meeting. I think we could accommodate that through a meeting with certainly, our administration. I would be happy to sit on it, but I'm not sure we need to have a discussion on scheduling at the council meeting. I'll leave that up to council's wish. There's a motion now, but I'm not sure that would be the most productive time of the council's agenda versus just really an operational procedural meeting.
Duncan?
Through your worship, sometimes there are opportunities at UBCM to meet with groups like this. Is that something council would like us to look into?
If we have the right people there.
The regional manager and not the communications, yeah.
So let's explore that. If we are at UBCM, and the majority of us are, and if some aren't and want to participate in that meeting by conference call, we could arrange that. But that might facilitate the ability to have that meeting without having to schedule it through our regular council meetings, and makes it sometimes more clunky. And then if we can't, let's find some dates and bring it back that we'll arrange a meeting here that perhaps we can either do it by call of a special when it works for them and council, or through an operational meeting with those that can make it. I agree. I don't think we need to do it specifically through a council meeting. So we'll try to make that work. Thank you. Thank you for that. Anything further under business arising out of the minutes? Thank you. So we'll move to correspondence. Our first letter, 6.1, we have a letter from Marcia Stewart, Executive Director of the Art Gallery, regarding the BC Rural Dividend Program. Councillor Parslow?
Yes, if I may, I need to add a little extra to this, but I'd like to move that we accede to the resolution request.
Okay. Seconded. Councillor Earl, discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. And you had one other item.
Yes, related to this it shouldn't be a big one for you, but I'd like to move that the city provide a letter to the Dawson Creek Art Gallery confirming its commitment to a 10-year lease agreement with the Southbees Art Society. If I
Yes,
second
so-
for that, I'll explain it.
So can I have a seconder? For a second. Councillor Earl, discussion, go ahead.
Okay, so essentially, Marcia's found out that to be considered for the grants, remember we're leveraging money that the city's giving to the art gallery for capital improvements. She made a presentation. Following up on that, the people, the funders require a letter of commitment, a 10-year. The curling club made a similar request, 3 months ago?
Something like that, yeah.
They needed a 10-year commitment. So you gave a commitment to the curling club that they would have occupancy of that building. So the art gallery needs a similar request for them to become eligible for the funding. So as I can't conceive any other society going into the art gallery to run the gallery, to me this is a no-brainer accommodation, so that we'll enable them to be eligible for, I forget, Ross, what are the two grants that she's looking for? The
NDIT and BC Gaming.
BC Gaming, yes. So they both require it. So I move that we support them.
Thank you. Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to staff. So the existing agreement with the South Peace Arts Society, correct? Because there's a South Peace
Dawson
Arts
Creek
Council.
Art Gallery.
There's
Yeah.
a council and then there's a society, and the acronyms
Yeah.
are very similar, so I'm just trying not to confuse them. That agreement is generally done on a 3-year term, and it's up next year, if I'm not mistaken.
Duncan?
So through your worship, Ross has been working on this one caveat. Our agreements are really different terms, different lengths, and council has that flexibility. We've had up to 5. We've had 20 with a renewal every 5 years. There's a lot of flexibility in there. We just can't tie the hands of a future council through a financial contribution. But Ross can maybe talk about where the current agreement's at.
Yes, thank you, through your worship. This particular agreement expired February of this year. There are a number of different agreements that are in the queue that I've been working on as we speak. I think we're quite close. We'll be proposing a 5-year agreement, although subject to the resolution today, we would make that 10 for a 5 and a 5-year renewal.
Okay, good to know. And
Sorry, and through your worship, as Councillor Parslow noted, this is becoming, through that gaming grant in particular, is becoming kind of the norm that they ask for a 10-year commitment. If we're going to provide funding or investment, they want to know that this facility is going to operate ongoing into the future. And with the curling rink, we also did not have an agreement at that time, and we sent a letter that said, essentially, they're operating it right now. It's our intent to enter into another agreement with them. And I think we did the 10 with the 5-year renewal. We'll look at it again in 5, and that was sufficient.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Further discussion? And so the motion is that we're going to enter into a 10-year agreement with the art gallery?
Through your worship, provide notice of intent, I think, or an intent to enter into an agreement with them.
Good.
The motion is confirmed it's a commitment to a 10-year.
Yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't describe the format of that.
Okay. Councillor Lexner?
I guess just looking at that, I'm certainly supportive of it. I think they do a wonderful job. It's a great facility. I think we want to make sure that it's the intent, because as you said, as you go through this, if there are things, whatever, I can't imagine anything unforeseen coming up. If that's acceptable and we could word it that way until we actually get the document drafted, voted on here, I'm fully supportive of that.
And we'll have administration bring that back for us with the agreement and what that looks like for council.
Yeah, so through your worship, we would provide that letter of intent now, but the agreement will come back through council later.
Good.
Councillor, will that meet their requirement? The letter?
Do you need an amendment, Cindy?
So it's a letter of intent will be given to them, that we're going to enter into an agreement with them for 10 years. What that agreement looks like, whether it's three-year agreement with a 3-year with a renewal or 5-year with a renewal, it'll be a letter of intent to enter into a 10-year. Councillor Wilbur?
I believe too the next intake for NDIT will be November, as well as gaming, depending on which gaming funds they're applying for, but I think it's November.
So through your worship, is it this week actually the intake for the gaming? Ross, do you remember?
I believe it's passed.
Oh, is it passed? Okay.
And they have submitted.
They just need
to. Your worship, they have submitted the application with a provision that will be
followed.
Okay.
Thank you. Further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Councillor. 6.2, we have a letter from Justina Falk, a local resident, regarding a letter of a sale of a piece of property. Duncan, can you give us a little background on this for council, or do you want to receive it for discussion first, council? What's your wish? Receive for discussion. Councillor Wilbur. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Go ahead, Duncan.
So through your worship, this property 10725 13th is south of Rotary Village. And if you were looking at it, you wouldn't realize that there is actually a parcel of land in there. It looks like it's part of the park. But there is directly south of the Rotary Village, there is a chunk of property in there. This individual in the letter has indicated that the taxes for this vacant land are becoming too much and is requesting that the city of Dawson Creek consider purchasing this property. BC Assessment assesses this land at $103,000, just something we can pull quickly to determine value. We do have restricted funds for the purchase of land. And that has to do with the community charter and when we sell lands and how those reserves are set up. I don't know that we have $100,000 sitting there that we could purchase some lands, but if this is something council would like to look at, we can definitely do some work on it if you'd like to consider it.
Thank you. Council. Councillor Javetkov?
I'm not in favor of purchasing it. I don't think there's any benefit to the taxpayers. It's, the location of it, I think, is unfortunate for the landowner because it's immediately on the south side of Rotary Village, but I think it may be more appropriate to try and sell it to the Rotary Club or
Society for Community Living now operating.
To attach it to that facility, because I think it's probably used for that now anyways. Looking at it, I mean, it's lawn, and I think it's maintained probably by the village.
Rotary Village, yeah.
So, but there is no advantage that I can see for the city to own it.
So you're making a motion that...
I'll make a motion that we receive for information.
Thank you. Second? Councillor Parslow. All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you.
Just for information, Rotary Village is owned and operated now by Dawson Creek Society for Community Living.
Oh, is that right?
It's transferred out.
Okay, good. Councillor Wilbur?
I realized we just received that for information, but I have a question, so I'm going to ask it, whether it's appropriate time. Like, I'm just wondering if there's the ability for staff maybe to direct the landowner to talk to the society, because the other dilemma is she clearly states she can't afford the taxes. We could end up with the property anyway. So I'm wondering, do we have that room of allowance to have staff say to the landowner, here's who you should talk to, and direct her towards?
Administration will respond back to the...
I just want to make sure that we got that in there.
Thank you. 6.3, we have a letter from Dan Rhodes, Director from Peace River Regional District, regarding the planning and land use management question that council, they presented to council last year on. And so I'll give a little bit of a context to this. So we, as the City of Dawson Creek, participate in any decisions related to land use planning in the Peace River Regional District. And you have different areas of that function that you provide into that process on behalf of your residents to the Peace River Regional District. And we pay the RD to be part of that planning function in order to participate in it, because now we're a part of the planning function. And council last year heard the presentation from Directors Rose and Hebert. And so the question is, from their perspective, is we are participating in decisions relating to land use in the electoral area, and they feel that it's in some cases not appropriate for us to have that input into decisions around land use or zoning in certain areas. And so they made the presentation, and council made the determination that they were going to continue to participate in the land use planning function and pay for that. And the directors have asked us if we would reconsider that. So that's the intent of these two letters we have today. And we have to make that decision by the end of August as to whether we're going to participate in that process and pay for that through to the Peace River Regional District on behalf of our taxpayers. Duncan?
Yes, through your worship, I think you've summarized everything. The only other note is that this is our only meeting in August.
Right. Councillor Parsons?
So just from my understanding, the 52,920 is, the cost is determined by the regional district and it's driven by formula?
Duncan?
So through your worship, I believe in 2019 it was 77,000. And yes, it's a requisition through our residents and it pays for that planning function and it's divvied up among the participating communities, which I believe is everybody.
Right. Everybody who participates in the function, if Chetwynd, Tumbler Ridge, Port St. John, if everybody participates in it, the cost of that planning function. And it's a requisition to our residents and business community through the property taxation by the PRRD through that requisition amount to our residents. It's not an amount that we pay on behalf of the city of Dawson Creek through our budget. Councillor Parsons?
Well, I think we do have an interest in what's happening, obviously, in the region, but particularly those things that happen, let's say, proximate to the city of Dawson Creek. I think we want to be aware what's being planned and have some input to things that might directly affect the residents of Dawson Creek. I wonder if we can get some commitment to consult about matters that occur proximate to the city of Dawson Creek. Fine, because what happens in Presbyteru is hardly of interest to the city of Dawson Creek particularly, and we may want to offer some advice, but so is there a way of ensuring that we have some input, those things that are proximate to the city, and leave the rest and save this cost thing? And unless I'd like to comment as well about the last paragraph, but in a moment.
Sure. Councillor Lyle. So Duncan, can you answer that?
Yeah, through your worship, it's my understanding, and again, regional districts is a little outside of our realm, but through section 381 that we do have the ability to enter into an agreement with the regional district and identify an area that we would like to remain a participant in and figure out that costing as well. It would reduce as we're not in the full area. So there is an opportunity. The only piece that I'll reiterate is it's pretty short timeline to get that done. I believe that has to be done by August 31st, but we haven't dealt with this, so I'm not sure.
And I think the timelines are set because of the budgeting request.
Correct.
And it's the tax requisition that has to be done in preparation for that. So, Councillor Alexa?
Yes, so speaking to this, I'm following through on what Councillor Parslow had said, that, you know, we are trying to streamline our budget. We're looking for every opportunity for the taxpayer. I think the fringe areas of Dawson Creek, our surrounding area, is key for us to have a say in. I would concur. I think our voice to state what goes on in Charlie Lake, I guess if I was somebody in Charlie Lake, I'd be looking to say what's Dawson Creek got to do with that. And likewise, although the other municipalities, I think there's a full inclusion, would have a say in our adjacent boundary as it sits today, if I understand the way the bylaw sits. But my preference would be to opt out of the full planning process and negotiate into a defined area around our city or region as to what I would really like to know the cost savings. So, I mean, if you're going to say $3,000 or if you're going to say $40,000, I think we want to know that. I think it can be accomplished. This is just by August 31st, we have to give notice. I don't think we have to have the defined area negotiated by then. I would look to administration for that question. If it was and we can't meet and don't meet now until September, I think if we had to on something like this pull together a quick meeting, it would be worthwhile for us to make this decision. But, you know, I read it, it's interesting. I mean, I know you're going to, I think at some point talk about this. I don't think this in any way is tied to the discussions we have with regard to the other issue they reference in their letter. I think it was an interesting choice, but I'm very receptive to looking at reducing our input and the cost on behalf of our taxpayer to a more defined area surrounding our city and impacted boundaries.
Absolutely. I think the defined area that we're concerned with is immediately those areas of rezoning that may impact our community, our city, our residents, our businesses. But without having the clarity around that, perhaps what we are looking to do today is maybe we direct administration to try to pull together some information in terms of, is there a defined area that we can look to? What is the radius and range of that defined area? Can we do that by, is it a defined area or is it by agreement? And what does that look like? And then bring that back for us for some information. And hopefully it's not too onerous to be able to have that prior to us by the end of August. Because it's my understanding we have to make that determination by the end of August by the legislation for the budget requirements in and out. But I'm guessing on that even, right? Councillor Parslow?
Yeah. Just to add to that, I mean, there's issues that I can recall around drainage and developments and lift pumps. As I think about Fort St. John, the Fort St. John Airport subdivision and issues like that. So I'm thinking that we do have a legitimate interest, but by the topography of the land and about commercial developments that benefit for being proximate to Dawson Creek but are being developed outside our boundaries with different code levels and stuff. So I think it might be just a circle, maybe of 5 miles or 8 kilometers or whatever you want to do, but I think we do have some legitimate interest.
The issue of the camp popped here in Farmington, which is 15 kilometers outside our boundary, and that's what I guess I think we need to kind of get some clarity around that in terms of what is that radius, what can we do legally within the bylaw. And the planning function. But so maybe if we do that, just ask administration, direct administration to bring back, get some further detail around, is there a defined area? What is it? How is it defined? And what would the cost implications be? Flip that back to council and within the next couple of weeks, and then council can determine whether we have sufficient information, we'll call a special, or if not, we just can't make a determination within that time frame. So can I have that by way of a motion? Go ahead.
Just a quick follow-up, Your Worship. So, first of all, August 31st, do we have to make the determination, are we in all or are we into a defined portion? As I understand this, I'm reading that, I'm not sure that's the exact date, but the other thing, when I see an increase of $25,000 over 1 year for the same participation level, if I'm reading this letter right, not sure what the next year's increase would be, but that's a very significant increase on the budget when you funded at $52,000 in 2018 and it jumps to $77,000 in 2019 for the same level of input. A very significant, I guess, concern in my mind for that. But I think what we would like to know for sure, we're going to have to make a decision on this. Are we staying in the full amount or are we going to go to another one? So if we can do that by special meeting prior to August 31st, and if August 31st is the drop dead date, I think this is what I think.
Okay.
So through your worship, the first question really is it noticed by August 31st, or do we need an agreement in place by August 31st? So that'll be the first thing that I tackle, and I'll get that information back to council. And if we need an agreement in place, then we would require a special meeting to have this discussion. If not, it'll come back September 9th.
Councillor Wilbur?
As I read this, it asks that we were to give notice of one of the 3 options: opt-out, full agreement, or partial joint planning area. So I think we just have to give them notice that we intend to opt in, but we want to discuss with them what that is. Is it fully, or is it just the joint planning area of lands? Like,
I guess my only concern is we're going to give them notice on something that we don't have sufficient information to that we're opting out of, we're opting into. And if we give them notice that we're opting out, but we want to get into a defined area and agreement, and that defined area agreement doesn't work for us, we're out of the. That's my only issue. Duncan?
And just through your worship, just to clarify, this is procedures outlined in the Local Government Act, so that's where we'll be focusing on ensuring that we're in compliance.
So that's, I guess, my thought was we had directed administration to develop and look into it, see if there's sufficient information that we can get back to council for us to make some kind of a decision that we can move forward with prior to August 31st. And if there is, then we'll call a special meeting to be able to do that. Councillor Jack?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Is that clear?
Yep.
Do you have a second, Councillor Parslow? Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. And the second letter from Director Hebert under 6.4.
The last paragraph?
Sure,
Both
yes,
the
go
same.
ahead.
Same letter.
Same letter.
Same letter. So it's pleasing to see that Director Hebert and Rose have agreed to discuss the usage levels of city facilities by rural residents and the appropriate funding level. Obviously, when it comes to the actual negotiation stance, we will be conducting that one-on-one, but the media has every right to report what happens in open meeting. And so I find this, regional directors don't seem to have an audience to respond to, but we do. And I think the report was factual, and we should just remind these directors that we do have a public has every right to know what is legitimate open business.
Sure. Thank you. Councillor Lacko?
And just following up on that, I mean, when I read it, you read into it how personal, like I had some concerns with the way the letter was written. I understand they have to answer to their rural constituents though too. So the part that we're going to discuss this and move forward, I think I had a discussion with them. They were concerned that they then began to get calls, didn't have answers for those, nor would we at this point. And I think it's very preliminary to say anything other than a discussion is taking place to see if there's an ability to do anything. But, you know, I'll recognize it to a degree that they have to answer. It's never been the intent of this city to negotiate through the media. I don't think the media hasn't taken it that way. And this was a piece of information that went out, and they have raised the concern that they received calls and didn't have answers. I think we'll be able to move the issue forward. I think it's one worthy of discussion and negotiation. When we have a finalized negotiation, everybody will know.
Absolutely. We had open meetings, media were there, media report on what they attend and get, and certainly none of us have had any discussions through the media or any other place other than gathering information on this really important topic for and on behalf of all of us. So we'll move it forward on that basis. Thank you. And the letter from Director Hebert under 6.4 is basically the same letter as we had from 6.3 under Director Rose. So
Receive for information.
receive for information. Second, Councillor Earl. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Somebody, go ahead. Somebody had some question?
Point of order.
Yeah.
I think if we receive that for information, we're responding to the first director and not the second director.
We'll respond to them jointly in the same basis. We just received that one, but we will respond back to them on that basis. That they're just working together.
That was my assumption.
6.5, we have a letter from Dr. Roger Becky, a professor from the University of British Columbia in regards to drilling campaign. And I'll just give a little background on this very quickly. UBC, I thought SFU, BC Oil and Gas Commission, Geoscience BC were working together collaboratively on a groundwater monitoring program of methane emissions into groundwater. And so they're conducting a series of drilling test wells across the region in which they'll do a long-term data collection process on the test wells they drill. They're very shallow test wells, I think 30, 40 feet. But they want to be able to have these wells situated in locations where they have long-term access to them, so that they can then, and they're away from, they want to make sure as they begin the project, they're away from the oil and gas activity where they're going to be directly impacted, and then eventually the more data they collect, the more they're going to be able to baseline that and be able to gather that information for the long-term benefit of that methane emission, so they get really good solid data with respect to our groundwater and wells and then the methane emissions into them. And so this letter is really, they had a meeting here this spring, I think, at Calvin Kirk Center. They also came to the Peaceful Regional District and gave the board a presentation on it. So it was very informative. I'm almost think it's worthwhile for us at some point to invite them in to give us an update on it. But this letter is asking us if we would like to have some input into some of that drilling campaign and have some well locations that we would like to suggest. So just in terms of some background. Councillor Javeco?
Yeah, I've looked at it. I mean, there's so many variables that they're looking at. I don't think the city has anything in particular that we could add to control whether where those locations are. So I'd make a motion that we receive for information.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Parslow. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 6.6, we have a letter from Kathleen Connolly, Executive Director of the Dawson Creek Chamber of Commerce regarding the cost of some signage advertising at the sign located. Now this is the issue council dealt with at our last meeting. Duncan?
Yeah, through your worship, so something that's come up since the last meeting and just working with the chamber, their intent is to sell advertising on this sign, and we're not clear, and we didn't have a lot of time to go through our zoning and our third-party advertising, and so hoping council will maybe direct staff to work with Kathleen and help understand what they're using it for, and then submit any required variance. If you recall, the soccer park wanted to do something similar, and we had to vary that zoning or that area so that we could comply. So we may have to do the same. So I would request, if council is interested in this, that direct it back to staff to figure that out.
Thank you. Councillor Wilbur?
I would make that motion.
That we direct administration to bring a report back to council, directing administration to develop a report around the variance that may be required if the chamber is selling advertising on it as it relates to our sign bylaw.
Yeah, and through your worship, maybe I'll just ask Kevin, typically we figure out what their request is, and then did we provide a report last time? I guess we would have for the variance. Okay.
So you'll work with the chamber to bring that back to council, and so we have clarity around what is being requested of us. So that's by way of a motion. Do I have a seconder first? Councillor Parslow. Councillor Earl, go ahead.
So just for this was the sign that was initially used for marketing the airport when that was done by Community Futures or the chamber?
City of Dawson Creek installed the sign and put it up there, and now it's the living large in a small city, and it advertised the City of Dawson Creek. I'm not sure what it was prior to that. I can't recall.
So it is our sign then?
It is the City of Dawson Creek sign.
Yeah, and sorry,
on city property.
Yeah, through your worship. The original understanding was we were going to put some businesses on there and advertise kind of our community and welcome to Dawson Creek. My understanding now from some discussion late last week is that the intent is to sell advertising annually on it and sell logos. So not to the City of Dawson Creek, but other businesses that would like to have their logo on this sign would pay annually to have it on there, and it's a revenue source. Is my understanding. So that changes it a little bit.
Councillor Wilbur?
And that's why I'd like to get the information back from staff, because I don't want perception to be out there that the city is supporting one business over another. So that's why I would like that information back so we can really look at it. So I think it's a great program, great idea, but I also don't think the city supports all local business, so I don't want a perception to be started that isn't necessary.
And I agree, and the issue is our bylaw, our sign bylaw, that says we can do this, this, and this, but we can't do this, this, and we need administration to bring that back when we understand what the chamber are interested in doing with it.
Okay.
Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 6.7, we have an email from Neil Postma, front counter BC authorization technician, request for approval. Councillor Lexton?
Just move for discussion at this point.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Wilbur. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Go ahead.
Your Worship, through this, I mean, when I read it with 3-to-1 riprap bank slopes will be created and so on, unless I may have missed it at the meeting, do we know how far out from the side of the bridge they will go on that 3-to-1? Do we know how far down? Have we seen drawings as to what it would look like? I would definitely like to see that before I made a comment. They're asking us to look at this, but have we seen that, or do we have drawings of it with the riprap bank stabilization going out to the, I'll speak to the east side primarily, but it will be both.
Sure. So through your worship, we have seen some preliminary drawings. I don't know that we've seen anything in detail yet. My understanding, Kevin, would they be required to submit something prior to construction on this?
So through your worship, we're going to see some drawings. We've seen preliminary, and they're months old. So again, it could have changed. It hasn't gone out for tender yet. They have talked about stabilizing that down to the east because they show the walking path going under the bridge. At least they did in the early stages. So they were going to do some work on that side. But as far as supplying, they will be providing some drawings because we have some utilities that are involved in the project, so we'll be getting them that, otherwise the project occurs.
I guess speaking, I understand we're talking about a Water Act application here, but I mean, if we need some leverage and we say, look, we would like to work with you on this, and you ever hit a roadblock, this is part of our leverage, this Water Act application. It's interesting they talk about fish salvage. I've lived here all my life. I don't think I've seen a fish in our creek, but maybe there are. But I would certainly like to know that, and we're going to do this, it's well needed in our community, but I want to make sure we have the ability as representatives of this city to ensure that what is put in is going to meet our needs. And so, could we check on that? I mean, I'm fine if, it says here specific details on construction methods will be provided by contractor CEMP. Have we seen that yet? I guess maybe I'm looking for clarification, and hopefully administration can touch base with them to say, look, is it your intent that we respond to this prior to seeing the specific construction methods? And if it is, I guess then I would be interested in that.
Okay. Okay.
And I think that's, to me, the other aspect of this, as it was mentioned, the design drawings that we saw as the conceptual stuff did have the walking path connected with trail underneath. It did show the bank stabilization with riprap and all that. So I want to make sure that they don't give us the old Pinocchio and swing that and not include all of that stuff in what they gave to us as their conceptual drawings of what we were it was going to look like and what it was the design was going to incorporate. So I wouldn't mind seeing that.
So through your worship, I know a motion isn't on the table, but essentially what I'm hearing is we'd like to see with some detail or with some kind of confirmation this is what it's going to look like at the end of the day, and not just really conceptual. It might look like this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Councilor Cheveka?
I guess my feeling is that we pushed for this, we asked for it, they accommodated us, they provided drawings, we've seen them a couple of times, we've had discussions with them, and I just wouldn't want to see us do anything that would jeopardize this project. It's important. It's one of the main flood mitigation issues that we've identified. And as far as, the technical aspects of riprapping and, the type of material they're using, I know Highways typically hauls their riprap from Pine Pass. There's a lot of, I guess, engineering goes into it, and I'm satisfied that the aspect of the walking path under the bridge, I think, is important, to follow through on that, but I'm comfortable with the engineering on riprapping. If you have driven through the Snake Pit and looked at that project, it's pretty substantial. Yeah. That rock being hauled all the way from Pine Pass because of the quality of it, and then placed in there like that, those are big projects. I mean, they're far beyond my technical expertise to comment on them, so maybe Kevin can comment on it, but...
Sorry, through your worship? Yeah, through your worship, I mean, this is where we rely on the expertise of the engineers. Kevin, any?
Through your worship, we're going to rely on their like you say, their expertise on determining the extents of it, but we could certainly ask for an updated set of drawings to see if there's been any significant changes since the last time.
It's an iconic crossing through our city. It's probably the most highest profile. It's going to be a major project. I completely agree with you. I know nothing about that. Snake Pit, I've been knocked out by in terms of the riprap and how they've done that bank stabilization. I just want to make sure what they told us, what it was going to be and what it was going to look like, is what they're going to complete with. And I've got no reason to question that, but just want to make sure that we cover that off with Councillor Lexman.
Yeah, my discussion is not based on the engineer. I'm no engineer, so I'm sure they will and continue to do the job they do, which is a good job wherever they do this. I, like you, your worship, and I'm sure everybody else, want to make sure that what we're going to get there is going to meet the city's expectations, and there's been no changes. And if there hasn't, let's get on with it.
Good. So we'll direct administration just to get a updated follow-up from ministry in regards to that. Councillor Lexman.
And one follow-up. The last there talks about the fall of 2022. Did I miss something? That seems like an extended time on the completion of this.
So when they came here, and it was that was the first, I thought construction was starting this year, but they're doing all geotech this year, goes to tender, it begins construction next year. So 2020 will be a construction year. Half the bridge will be built and half the road will be closed. 2021, they'll do the other half with construction to complete the end of 2021. Was my understanding of what they said.
Yeah, this is the fall of 2020. 3 years to do that.
But
big job, but 3 years seems like a long
But
time.
my understanding was the bridge would be completed in that 2 years, and then the final wrap-up would be finished with the cleanup and all of the rest within 2022, I'm assuming. But that was based on their construction timeline they gave to us.
Again, through your worship, I don't know that we have any additional information from the last presentation they made.
So we'll ask for that clarification on construction timeline.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah. So we have a motion that we direct administration to get a updated information from ministry in regards to the design of construction as well as timeline.
Sure. I'll
Second?
make that motion.
Councillor Kemp, discussion? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Letter from Shaylee Wilbur, President of the Southeast Health Services Society.
I'm leaving.
If I may,
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Parslow.
make a comment.
Let's receive for discussion.
Okay, let's see for discussion.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Earl. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Go ahead.
You know, I support the concept here, but I have problems with the wording of this proposed resolution. The part that reads in the second line, and that City Council supports this project through its duration. I will border any financial, us incurring another cost centre. We have too many cost centres already. We need to reduce those cost centres. So I have problems with that. And then through our fiscal gap discussions and budget discussions and other things, we've been told that administrative staff is stretched and can't get on with as much as we would like them to get on, and I think this is, I guess this is directed through you, Mayor, to staff. If they don't have time for some other things, why are we having time given to this? So I'd just like to comment through you to staff about that.
Duncan?
So through your worship, and I was hoping to speak, if council would like to move forward with this, it would be my recommendation that we utilize our grant funding to fund these 30 hours, and we bring in a casual employee, approximately $1,400 for 30 hours to complete the job descriptions, etc. So it would be funded out of your grants program, not out of the administration budget.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Javecka?
So is a casual employee capable of doing job descriptions?
Duncan?
So through your worship, most likely that casual employee would come in and do, help with the agenda and help with the other administrative duties. And our staff would then be relieved of that work in the job description. So logistically, we could figure it out.
Councillor Javeco?
Yeah, I just wondered about, there's probably staff here that are capable of doing job descriptions. And considering that a lot of the work has been volunteer work already for that project, I just wonder if the staff that are capable of doing job descriptions have been asked if they would like to volunteer some time. There's a lot of satisfaction in volunteering, and I wouldn't want to have these folks miss the opportunity, to do something positive like that.
Duncan?
Through your worship, I don't know if that would constitute city council support or City of Dawson Creek support if they were to volunteer.
Go ahead.
That would require the board to make the request to the individuals.
Right. Go ahead, one more.
I'll make a motion at this point that we provide a letter of support for their grant application.
Do you have a seconder? Councillor Parslow, discussion? So, go ahead, Councillor Lexman.
So the grant application with nothing attached to it, I guess I'm looking for clarification. I mean, I certainly was concerned as well with 30 hours of administrative time from the city when we're going through significant work, and we put a lot of work onto our administrative staff today, but the ability to fund it through a grant, I think changes that somewhat for me in having that information that you just put forward. So a letter of support, I'm good with that, but I would also support the ability under the grants to authorize up to 30 hours. Now, however that is determined, we have a set rate, I'm guessing, we hire these staff at.
Yes, so through your worship, it's approximately $1,400 based on current wages today.
You'd have salary, you'd have some
benefits,
and some. So I'm going to. The reason that for me why this is such an important project is this health society and the partnership with the South Peace is this is solidifying, in my view, health services, acute care health services in our community, maternity, orthopedic, oncology, general surgery, all of those things that go on, and it creates and solidifies them where the demand for those services now are going to increase as a result of residents from outside our region asking to be able to come to Dawson Creek for those maternity services. And so we've seen the chipping away of services at the acute care services at our hospital because of the centralization of services through Northern Health at Fort St. John. And to me, the more that we can solidify acute care services in our community, the stronger that new hospital will be and the stronger the demand for services will be when it comes from the entire region. And we're getting huge support for this Bolter Ice House. We're getting huge support for it in so many different ways that I'm also not, I agree with Councillor Parslow, I'm not good with us building an additional cost center into our operation, but I'm fully supportive of putting that money out of the grant money. This is a big one to me in terms of how we build health services and how we build our community. And so we have the grant money available within our budget that council's approved. I'm good with the support of that funding coming from grants to this program. Councillor Earl?
So just for my own clarification, if I recall correctly, we cut our grant amount from $25,000 to $12,500 for the year. Of that $12,500, what's remaining? Do we know kind of offhand? Sorry, I put you on the spot.
We just added up 1 second.
Okay.
It's about 11,000.
So we've got 11,000 left of a $12,500 budget, and it's August. So that's we do.
Anyway, that's my input. Councillor Lexstrom, then Councillor Parslow.
It's just speaking to the motion. I would like to, at this time, I will move an amendment that to the main motion that states we offer a letter of support. My amendment would read, and also that we would support 30 hours of administrative assistant time through a grant from the City of Dawson Creek up to a maximum of $1,400, not to exceed $1,400.
Do I have a seconder for the amendment? Councillor Earl, discussion on the amendment? Questions, comments? You ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Opposed, Councillor Javetka. And on the main motion, any further discussion, comments, questions? Ready for the question? All in favor?
Can I have the main
Sorry?
motion read?
That we approve a letter of support
For the grant
for the
application.
grant application, and it's now been amended that we would include support from our grants of up to 14, not to exceed 14 million. Are you ready for the question? On the motion, all in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Opposed, Councillor Javetka. Thank you. And we can get Shaylee back in. (6.9) We have an email from Rebecca Matthews regarding electromagnetic radiation pollution. Councillor Earl.
Received for information, Your
Do
Worship.
you have a seconder? Councillor Lexstrom. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Item 7, reports. And this first one is a report that I felt was timely, and that we're one meeting in August that we've had a number of interactions now with our Wasco, the new airport service provider for the operations of our airport. We were in a bit of a hurdle as we were nearing the end of the contract, and now I've extended it. We brought them in for 3 months. That term is closing in to be completed in September, and without having the opportunity to get it back out to tender, I'm suggesting and recommending that Council extend this airport management agreement to Wasco for a year. And I'm going to kind of leave that a little bit up for discussion, because our contract would be normally January to December. Duncan?
So through your worship, it would, if we were extending them a year, September through to September. However, we're entering into that winter season, and yeah.
So anyway, it's my recommendation, having had some experience with these folks. They've done, I think, a superb job. I've been really pleased with them, and I'd like to make the recommendation that Council extend this agreement with Wasco for a year, which gives us opportunity to consider the infrastructure, the operations, as well as deciding that future structure of the airport that we've got to get into. So I'm making that by way of a motion for the City of Dawson Creek to extend the current airport agreement with the Winnipeg Airport Services to July of 2020. Councillor Parslow, second. Discussion. Go ahead, Councillor Lexstrom, Councillor Parslow, or Councillor Javetka.
A quick one, Your Worship, to July 31st, 2020, are we not going to September? Are we going to do the full year? Is there a reason we're bouncing a month out of there?
Yeah, so through your worship, September, really, you're entering into that winter season, and to be changing the contractor over right on the cusp of entering snow, making sure you have your salt and your gravel and all those other pieces coordinated, your equipment ready for the winter season. That's why we backed it up. My suggestion to the mayor was it's either July or it's the following June, and you do closer to 18 months with them, but you don't want to end it right on the cusp of that winter season.
Go ahead.
Just follow up. And the cost associated with the extension, is it based on the 3 month, like per month cost, or do we have that discussion as that occurred?
So through your worship, that would be a negotiated, and there are some parameters within the agreement. It should actually decrease the cost that we're currently paying. They are partial in and out. If we were to lock into this agreement, they would have somebody on site full-time as opposed to the partial fly-in, fly-out model.
And so you'll bring that agreement back to us?
Because it's less than a year, I have the ability to enter into that agreement, and in the original agreement, we have some of those costs already fixed, so it should not be a big discussion.
Okay. Councillor Javetka?
So, do we know what the cost is, or we just, we'll figure it out later, or what?
Duncan?
Well, through your worship, the last discussion we had was, make it work within the existing budget, which we've gone ahead and done. We were paying approximately, I think, about $12,000 a month for their service. I haven't negotiated further with them. That was approximately, I think, maybe $2,000 or $1,500 more than the previous contract. So it would be very similar to the previous contract we held for 5 years, I think it was.
This current agreement with Wasco is going to expire in September?
September 6th, Your Worship.
Which is prior to our next meeting. So that's why I wanted to get it on here, because we need to get this. We can't operate without an airport manager. Sorry, somebody else over here had their hand up, I thought. No? Councillor Wilbur?
Actually, I just want to add to that. Since they've come on board, we've really seen a difference, as you've said, at the airport, but also the information we're getting back. I mean, I've never heard before since I was elected that it was pre-planned in 1984 for our zoning. So, you know, to be giving that information, the stuff we're getting, I think they're doing an excellent job, and we're seeing the benefits of having them here, and I'm quite happy to support extending that agreement.
Thank you. Further discussion? Comments? Questions? You ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Council. 7.2, we have a memo from the legislative clerk regarding the Dawson Creek exhibition special event permit approval. And so I wish Brenda was here today. We do the old
straw polls. Yep.
Straw poll. So we had the exceptional circumstance of the fair getting extended, the chuck wagons getting extended one day, so we required to do a little bit of interaction with council over the weekend. So now we'll ratify that poll that we took over the weekend. Councillor Parslow?
I move that the memo from the legislative clerk read Dawson Creek Exhibition Association special event permit approval for fall fair be received. Further, that the approval of the following request for special event permit be ratified. Watering Hole Beer Gardens number 179264, Grandstand Area number 180258, Host Intent Infield Suited Suite, thank you. Sponsor
Typo.
event in Beer Gardens number 180262-1 and 180262-2. That covers it.
Thank you.
With those
Seconded?
typing errors. Yeah.
Councillor Kemp, discussion? Councillor? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Council. 7.3, we have report 19128 from the Development Services Manager regarding a development variance permit for Dean Good, 1628 Loran. Councillor Javetkov?
I move that report number 19-128 from the Development Services Manager, read Development Variance Permit 19-09 be received. Further, that Development Variance Permit 19-09 be approved to vary Subdivision and Development Servicing Bylaw number 4353, 2017 by increasing the maximum driveway width from 9 meters to 12.2 meters for 1628 Loran Drive.
Thank you. Seconded. Councillor Wilbur, discussion? Councillor Lexner?
Just a quick one. In reading the report, and I thank you for that, so a driveway can cover 45% of the frontage of your lot. Does that mean, can people still then forget the parking? Can they park on their front lawn, or is that a violation of the bylaw?
True, Worship. I'll ask Kevin to answer that.
So through your worship, this is specifically to deal with the width of the entrance of the driveway.
Yeah.
And it was brought in a few years back because we were dealing with very wide driveways covering the entire width of properties, not giving us anywhere to store snow. So that's really what it is. Once you get onto your property, you have the ability to widen it out and do it as you wish, so to speak. But this one is just simply widening that out. I think he has an RV or something he needs to get it done.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, questions? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. 7.4, we have report 19130 from the fire chief regarding some donation of Firefighters Without Borders, some equipment. Duncan, can you just speak to this very quickly for council?
Sure, through your worship. I'll ask Ross to take this one on.
Thank you.
Thank you, through your worship. A request from the fire chief to disperse of some aging equipment in the fire hall. Typically, over a 10-year period, our turnout gear, as an example, becomes obsolete, and it typically goes to the landfill. It has no monetary value whatsoever. We've been working with Firefighters Without Borders, which is a Canadian nonprofit organization. that actually collects this type of equipment and will ensure that it finds its way into smaller northern communities, First Nations, and even agencies around the world who don't have access to that type of equipment.
Thank you, Ross. Councillor Kemp?
Can I move the recommendation that the report number 19-130 from the fire chief regarding donation of equipment to Firefighters Without Borders be received? Further, that council approve the donation of equipment identified in the equipment and apparatus donor form to the charitable organization Firefighters Without Borders.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Earl, discussion? Is there any value, or have we ever had any interaction with any of those volunteer fire departments around the region, like Aris or a place like that, Tom's Lake, are they required to meet the same requirements, and could they make use of this equipment? Duncan?
So through your worship, it's my understanding they can actually access this program as well, and really Firefighters Without Borders administers it. I don't know, I believe there's some items they may be able to use, but there's other items that also are kind of expired and not for use. So the Firefighters Without Borders, my understanding, they separate that in as far as what can be used and what can't.
The reason I ask is I guess I just make the leap, if there's volunteer organizations within our own region that we're supporting within our rural fire protection agreements, and we have these other ones, is there a reach out to them first to say, look, we got this stuff, it's going to the landfill, or it's going to these guys, could you guys make use of it, prior to us sending it to someplace outside the region or the area?
So through your worship, we can definitely do that prior to submitting our donation form, if that's what council would like.
It was just a question in terms of,
Yeah.
do we do that first to check and support our neighbors first? Anyway, Councillor Wilmer?
Well, it's my understanding too that our neighbor volunteer firefighting departments can actually apply to this program. So part of it is the equipment goes through there. They make sure that it's going to work. I mean, it can age out, but there can also be other things that maybe an apparatus isn't going to work. So all of that gets checked before it gets released. So, and I do believe some of our local fire departments do apply through this program for equipment.
Seemed to me it was one less step.
But
Anyway.
we also want to pass on equipment that we know is going to work. We don't want to send a volunteer firefighter equipment either. Then we want to make sure it's checked and ticked off, in my mind.
Councillor Lexington?
So just for clarification for my own mind, are we at the point then with what we're going to deal with is we will check with our surrounding rural fire departments to see if they're interested in this equipment? If not, we forward it to this organization?
No, so through your worship, the motion is that we'll send the donor list to Firefighters Without Borders, so you need to make
They'll
that
deal with
amendment
it.
to say.
I think it's for future.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like council's made the motion, and unless you want to change it or defeat it. It was just a question in my own mind that was what I was raising.
I mean, it seems like one extra step.
Sure.
That a rural fire department around Dawson Creek would have to apply to this group. Heaven forbid, they got turned down and it was sent somewhere else, in my mind.
Yeah.
Makes no sense.
So, any further comments, questions? Are you ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. 7.5, we have report 19132 from the city planner regarding our development variance permit 1904C for Rorison land development. This one we've been dealing with. Councillor Parslow?
Move that report 19132 from the General Manager of Development Services redevelopment variance permit number 19-04C for the Crescent View subdivision be received. Further, that the minutes of the June 24th, 2019 regular meeting of council be amended in order to accurately reflect motion 5.1.8 regarding DVP 19-04B by including the variance to waive the requirements in relation to geotechnical borehole spacing. Further, that the application for development variance permit 19-04C be approved as presented within this report, dependent on no opposition being received during the 10-day notification period and effective only after successful notification period.
Thank you. Seconder? Councillor Lexstrom, discussion? Councillor Duncan?
So just through your worship, if I may, I'm going to ask Kevin just to explain what this means now, where we're at in this process, and what does this mean?
Thank you.
So through your worship, saw the one amendment in the resolution. It was missed in the prior variance. So other than that, the previous variance is intact. Essentially what we've done is we've added a couple other points based on the last council meeting, which was that the sidewalk that would go throughout the entire development all the way to 17th Street would need to be completed no later than the end of 2021 construction season. And secondly, that all of the 117 lots that were in the original subdivision application be titled by the end of 2024, so that's a 5-year window. And if either one of these timelines are not met, the development variance that is in front of you would then expire. And the remaining undeveloped properties would be subject to the applicable bylaws of the day.
Thank you, Kevin. Duncan?
And through your worship, I'll also take this opportunity to introduce our new planner, Nick, who, gentleman sitting up here, has got to start with the City of Dawson Creek and work on this project with Kevin very closely right off the bat. So it was a great welcome for him.
Good. Welcome, Nick. Any discussion, comments, questions? Councillor Javeka?
So I don't remember the conversations that well. I guess there was a lot of conversation and some of it I missed, but the last 3 bullets are the third to the last and the second to the last. The sidewalk to build it up to 17th by 2021. Is that something that Rorson agreed with, or was it, I don't remember what the situation was there.
Kevin?
So through your worship, that was what council agreed upon in the meeting. That was the direction we were given. Originally, Mr. Rorson had asked for it to be 2 years from the time of titling the properties. The first 17 lots, I believe he was going to do, or 20 lots. Council decided that they would like to see it 2 years from this date. So that potentially bumps it up to fall of 2021.
So the other one is title all 117 lots by the end of 2024. Was that discussed as well with Rorson, or?
I know the council, that was a discussion of council, that they wanted to see all those lots completed. I can't remember if Mr. Rorson was still in the room at that moment in time. He has signed off this variance before we came to council because we wanted to ensure that he saw that. We didn't want to back and forth again, so he came in last week, signed the application, saw these, this information, and so we brought it forward.
Okay, so if he doesn't comply and this chunk of land reverts back to square one as far as the development permit, and it's not developed, for example, you know, if the lots don't increase in value, if there's no demand or whatever, for whatever reason, I mean, to me it wouldn't make sense to title 117 lots if they're not going to be sold. I don't know what the taxes would be, but they would be in excess of $35,000 a year. So if his decision then is to just basically put everything on hold, do we have any influence or control on what happens to that property?
To your worship, not really, it's zoned. So he would have the ability to sell it to somebody else, and as long as they were going to construct something that was permissible in zoning, they could come in and put a subsequent subdivision application. Mr. Rorson's always got the opportunity to come back to council before these expire and ask for extensions or things like that. I mean, that's always an option for the owner to do at that moment in time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Further questions, further comments? Thank you, Kevin. You ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. 7.6, we have report 19133 from the Chief Financial Officer regarding a contract extension for our commercial property engineering and brokerage services. Councillor Laxton?
I would move the recommendation, Your Worship.
Thank you. Second? Councillor Kemp, discussion? Ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Flavia.
I was just thinking, I mean, the recommendation is to extend it by 1 year. I should make that a resolution.
It's okay, we
Sore
we
hip
read
today?
it.
Included in there that we have the ability to extend this by 1 year,
Yeah.
at which time that's what we're moving here. So the extension will be in place, and then we'll have a recommendation brought back before the end of this year is up, and a new 5-year will be looked at.
Okay, thank you.
The council wanted to get to lunch, so I was...
Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, I thought, lots of this.
7.7, we have report 19134 from the corporate officer regarding a policy amendment regarding land sale. Councillor Earl?
I'll move that report number 19-134 from the corporate officer regarding land sale policy amendment be received. Further, that the amended land sale policy attached to this report be approved pending the required 30-day review period.
Thank you. Second? Councillor Parslow, discussion? Councillor Javetkov?
So when we talked about this, we talked about the walking trail that exists there already. This, to me, the way it reads is that we intend on declassifying the entire road allowance and adding the entire road allowance onto the auction mart property. So that doesn't allow for the walking trail.
We're on a different...
We're on land sale policy amendment. We haven't got to the... You're jumping the gun.
Sorry.
With anxious anticipation. I'm looking forward to bylaw 8.2.
I should put on my reading glasses, I guess.
Any further comments, questions on 19134?
On the current motion.
Ready for the question? Or
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
I'm happy with that.
All right.
Yeah.
Councillor- Well, as long as you're happy, we're the rest. Councillor Parslow, did you have a question?
I was just going to thank Jeremy for reading the motion for everybody.
Are you ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Caddy, they need some food.
Yeah.
Bylaws 8.1, we have our animal responsibility bylaw 4420 for consideration of adoption. Councillor Wilbur, move. Second. Councillor Kemp,
I just
discussion.
lost it.
Councillor Javetkov.
I'm still not in favor of it. I think this is, it's going way above and beyond what we should be doing as a city, basically approving individuals to trespass onto private property and remove animals that haven't been proven to be causing any problems. I just don't agree with it. I think it's an abuse of landowners' rights, and I'll vote against it.
Thank you. Councillor Lexner?
I'll concur with Councillor Javetkov. I think it's a great document, other than the one that allows access to private property based on a cat. I'll use that as an example, not being tied up or chained, and if the cat's on my property, it's on my property. And I don't have cats, so I'll clarify that right now, but the thought, because a cat's sitting in somebody's front yard, somebody could come in and take that cat off their property. It just, I'm surprised legally we can do this.
Go ahead, Councillor Javetkov.
Yeah, just another comment, and I've said it before. When we originally talked about the cat, dealing with cats, and I support all of that previous, those previous decisions, but the idea was that if a cat is creating a problem, the bylaw officer was going to go in and place a trap, they're humane cat traps, and catch the actual cat that was creating the problem. Now all of a sudden, it's switched over, and we're accusing all the cats. We're going to go on people's properties and take their cat. This cat may be 30 years old. It may have never left the deck. Because it's not tethered or in a cage, it's automatically assumed that it's one of the culprits. It just doesn't sit right with me.
Thank you. Further discussion? Further comments? You ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Opposed, Councillor Lexstrom, Councillor Javetkov. 8.2, Councillor Javetkov, if you can be ready. We have Report 19120 from the Deputy Corporate Officer regarding highway closure and dedication removal bylaw for 422. Land sale bylaw for the Dawson Creek and District Exhibition Association. Motion. Councillor Jackoff?
I'll move for discussion.
Thank you. Second? Councillor Kemp? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Go ahead.
So
Councillor
what I
Jackoff?
said before. So I have no problem with declassifying the right-of-way, but I have a problem with including the entire right-of-way with the auction mart property. Because there is provision for a walking trail, the extension of the Rotary walking trail to the Encana Center, and there has to be provisions for it. So I don't know how the best way to deal with it is, but that's my concern.
Okay. Administration, Duncan?
So through your worship, there is a walking trail there already that connects over to the Encana Event Center, and this land sale does not include that walking trail, and I'll just confirm that with Cindy, who's been working on this project.
Through your worship, the existing walking trail that's there is on the soccer park property, but not within the fence. So it's actually on city property already.
And we will not be disposing of that property.
Councillor Wilbur?
And my understanding too, when this first came to us, the reason for this was they actually have this portion of land within their fences already. And so then between the soccer park pitches and the auction mart fence is the walkway, which is quite wide, and there's a bridge and everything in there. So they're already using this land. That was why this was brought forward.
So all of the right-of-way, the existing right-of-way, the road allowance is included in what they've already got developed?
So through your worship, there was a road allowance that went all the way from 116th all the way to the former property or vacant property or Ball Diamonds, etc. A portion of that was removed, I don't know how many years ago. So you have a small chunk of road allowance that ends essentially at the riding arena, the old rodeo roping arena. And so that small chunk of road allowance is fully fenced and is currently being utilized as part of their cattle holding area. And essentially what we'd be doing is moving the property line that's currently in the middle of that cattle holding area or 3/4 of the way across to where their existing fence is now. And you wouldn't see any change.
Okay.
Thank you. Further discussion? Motion? Councillor Wilbur?
Sure, I will move that report number 19-120 from the Deputy Corporate Officer regarding highway closure and dedication removal bylaw number 422/2019 and land sale Dawson Creek Exhibition Association bylaw number 4423/2019, removing the highway dedication of the road between 401 116th Avenue Paul Loisel Soccer Park and 301 116th Avenue Auction Mart, and permitting the sale and amalgamation of the road with the property located at 301 116th Avenue be received. Further, that the highway closure and dedication removal bylaw number 422/2019 and land sale bylaw 4423/2019 be given first 3 readings. Whew.
Thank you.
That's why I don't read them out, Lexter.
Councillor Parslow?
Yeah, you should have read that for me.
Further discussion on the motion?
Well, now that Councillor Javatkov has some orientation to the geography of the city, we can get on with this business at council.
Oh, holy. We need lunch.
I think everyone really needs lunch.
Are we ready for the question?
Yes.
All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Thank you all. Mayor's business, a couple of items. We had a meeting a few weeks ago with the Minister of Parliamentary Secretary for Sport and Multiculturalism for the province, Ravi Kalan is here. Anyway, council, I think majority of council were there. We had a good representation from the community talking about the issue of multiculturalism and the issue of the worry about the spread of hate in community, and but it was really I thought a very healthy discussion, good input from a number of community organizations, and I appreciated the opportunity for the parliamentary secretary to be in Dawson Creek for the day. Obviously, the Fall Fair exhibition and rodeo is ongoing. Unfortunately, the weather wasn't conducive for the first couple of days, but it's ended up on a real strong note with the conclusion this evening of having to move the chuck wagons and the conclusion of those races this evening. So it'll be a fun night and a really great event. My compliments, obviously, to the Dawson Creek and District Exhibition Association, Connie and the entire team, who have done an amazing job of keeping that grounds in a shape where they could host a world-class event like that, given the conditions they faced over the last month of trying to get it ready with the rain, and certainly the rain and severe weather for 2 or 3 days leading up to it. Grandstands and the participation at the Midway and all of the different events was really, really good over the weekend. So I appreciate all of that hard work that goes into hosting a major event in our community. We had the tent event on Thursday night, hosted by council in partnership with our Soto First Nations neighbors, and had great participation, great attendance. Good attendance from the industry folks from Calgary and Vancouver and local businesses, and I really appreciate the opportunity to host and support the rodeo in that way, and certainly the industry folks from Calgary and CAP and all the others were very supportive of the opportunity to come in and connect with our local businesses, and that's what it should be. And the mayor was off for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, so it was a light time and a good time. We had a delegation this afternoon from Wasco and gave us council an update on the airport extension, as well as the potential for this airport drainage project, a $3.5 million project that potentially has the funding, and so I want to bring that back now for council's consideration, and any questions to move that forward. Duncan, do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, through your worship, we do have a map. I think, Kevin, you have a, and we'll kick this out to council and make sure we include it on the agenda, but it essentially breaks out the proposal and it'll outline the area. And now I have to find mine. And it'll just give you an idea of kind of the drainage that this culvert. Did he skip the mayor?
He don't need to know.
He doesn't need to know.
So, I apologize for the short notice, but as James mentioned, we really just found out about this last week, and so we dug through our old proposal that we had and pulled this document. And essentially, it's a 2,600 millimeter culvert. It's at the west end of the runway. And it takes, if you move to page 2 and even page 3, all of that area in red drains through that culvert at some point at different times. And we feel very lucky that they're considering this project, as the impact is actually greater than just the airport itself. It's really on that drainage. And so normally they don't necessarily look at those projects, and so we're very thankful that they are considering it. It is approximately a $3.5 million budget. Flavia, if you want to talk about the kind of 2 funding opportunities.
All right, Your Worship. So we have 2 options here. If we manage to get the project done by December, then we can use our current capital reserve, and then we fund back again with the reimbursement of the grant. If we're gonna extend it for the next year, like by March, and then wait for the reimbursement, then I will need to go through a short-term borrowing, we call revenue anticipation. We can get a good deal with the new bank that we are working with, and we would be using then the short-term borrowing and paying back again when we get that. But that would run interest, so.
Mm-hmm. And the interest would not be recoverable through the grant, so we would have that additional amount included.
For that period that we'll be getting the short.
Yeah, and through your worship, our goal, and in speaking with James, and now he will be the person working on that project if approved, We would like to have that out. We're updating our engineering right now, which went out 4 or 5 years ago. We're updating that now. We're working on that. Essentially, we would need to turn a tender out locally, find a contractor that can provide that concrete culvert and complete that work. And we really need to have it done before it freezes up. So it would be a very quick turnaround. It's not a complex project, but it would be a quick turnaround.
Good, thank you. Councillor Earl.
Yeah, with respect to what's confidence level, we can actually have it done by December. Are we?
So through your worship, Kevin deals mainly with our contractors. This is civil in nature, I guess, and what we're hearing is it's not as busy as it has been in the past, but maybe I'll ask Kevin to
Yeah, through your worship, it's definitely within the abilities of some local contractors. We had some projects completed in the last couple of years, like the reservoir, and that, a big project, so they're more than capable. It'll really come down to how busy they are, and I'm hearing that they're not super busy, so there might be an opportunity for someone to get good pricing and to get on the project.
And just one more comment through your worship, Kevin. This culvert itself, my understanding is this is something we are going to have to do at some point, just based on the amount of flow through that area.
Yeah, through your worship, as you can see, that catchment area that you see on the map in front of you, it takes an incredible amount of flow, and that was all identified through a ski hill drainage project that the Ministry of Transportation did. And so it's been identified it needs to be upgraded. That culvert is not only undersized, but it is deteriorating. And so what happens is if it can't take it all there, it ends up going down First Street towards the Reclamation Center and causing all sorts of issues.
Councillor Lexstrom?
Just a quick question. So we'll get this out to tender as quickly as possible. One of the concerns I have is, will it come back here for us to approve that tender?
So yeah, through your worship, based on the value, it would have to come back to council, and that would be kind of that next piece. And maybe I'll just ask James how quickly we are, or how close we are to getting a tender and being able to actually put out a tender for civil.
Through you, your worship. So last week we issued a request for updated pricing for the design engineers, because the project previously was combined, and so now we're separating it. So we received those on Friday. The intent is that we will hopefully be in a position to notify the potential preferred proponent. And the reason why I articulated that way is because there's a need for us to provide updated pricing to Transport Canada. So I've stipulated in the request for updated pricing that by the end of this week that they provide us with updated cost estimates that we can provide to Transport Canada. And that is contingent on them, so they would provide that as being the potential preferred proponent, but not officially awarded to them yet.
And that's the engineering firm.
That's the engineering firm. Then once the project goes into Transport Canada for approval, they send us back a contribution agreement, at which point we would be able to tender the project. And so the intent is that we would have that subject to approvals through council. The intent is that we would have that done over the next 2 or 3 weeks, and that we would be hopefully moving, so the approved engineer would then be working behind the scenes with the contractors. It's my belief that there's only 1 or 2 contractors that could provide the actual culvert itself, and so we would be working behind the scenes to get them ready as well. So the turnaround is fairly quick. Snow's coming fairly quick, but there's a fairly good level of confidence that we can get this done. At least the majority of the major work's done this year. What we need done this year is the trenching, the placement of the granular, and then the placement of the culvert itself. Next spring, if we need to come back and tidy up some of the backfilling, then we could do that at that point.
Go ahead.
The reason I ask on that, it's always important, I think, as we tender things, that you'll get different bids, right? And so my worry is somebody comes in, and we'll look at this, and probably a better time to discuss it would be when we look at it. You get a low bid, we look at the low bid, we give it, and all of a sudden they don't meet the timeline we want. I want to ensure that when we put out a tender, they know that if they don't meet that timeline, there'd be penalties, so that we aren't incurring the cost of having to go to short-term borrowing because they bid it low and couldn't get it done.
Okay.
So that's my talk on that.
Good.
And so Flavia, on that point, if we had to short-term borrow for 3 months, what would be can you give any estimate in terms of what would be the financial impact of that?
I need to calculate.
Councillor, I'll leave that with you. Councillor Parslow, you had a question?
I was just going to make the motion,
Okay.
but if you...
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I'm good with that. That's just a bit of information.
So, subject to approval, receipt of ACAP funding commitments, we proceed with the replacement of the culvert and all ancillary work associated with that.
Thank you. Second, Councillor Wilbur. Discussion? Questions? Comments? And the funding?
Yeah, maybe adding the funding in, Flavia?
Funding will come from...
Those two options?
Go ahead, Flavia.
Yes. Your ship, the average cost would be about 35,000 for 3 to 4 months.
Okay. And so the funding would come from our...
I would use our new bank, which they are giving a good
the
rate.
short-term borrowing if required, if the project isn't completed by 2020, or by the end of 2019, then we would have to go into short-term borrowing, and if it's this year, it's going to be entirely funded through our capital reserve surplus.
Correct.
Thank you. And that'll be part of the motion?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Moved, seconded, discussion, questions? All in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Thank you, James. That's it for me. Diary, anything? No?
Sorry, through your worship, if I just may make one comment under mayor's business. Council has not seen the budget schedule. We talked about September 9th being the budget assumptions and a public consultation. Unfortunately, Flavia needs to leave country for a family matter, and so that it will be bumped ahead up to October 7th as far as the public consultation and the budget assumptions. Unless council wanted to do a special meeting, but even then, I don't think Flavia is back until mid-September.
Yeah, I'll be back on this.
Okay, we'll work with that on Flavia's return.
Okay.
Consent calendar? Anything? Anybody? Motion for the consent? Councillor Wilbur, Councillor Earl, all in favor? Opposed, carried, thank you. And strategic priorities? Duncan, anything?
So as for your worship, just note that the approved plan is now on the agenda and will remain there.
Thank you. Media, Rob, anything?
No, but if you guys ever do want to negotiate through the media.
We'll put you, if we had some room in the budget where we could hire consultants. Thank you. Motion to recess to close and adjourn for lunch, please. Councillor Wilbur, Councillor Earl, all in favor? Post carried. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.